Alara Whitford pressed herself against the cold stone wall, her heart hammering as footsteps echoed closer. In her trembling hands lay the stolen document that could destroy everything or save it. She'd crossed every line tonight, broken into a lord's private chamber, defied every rule society demanded she follow, risked her family's name for a sister who didn't even know she existed half the time. And now, caught between the ledge and exposure, she faced the one man in England no woman dared to cross, the Duke of Ashenmore himself, standing in the doorway with eyes like winter frost. Welcome to a story of courage born from invisibility, where a forgotten daughter becomes the storm no one saw coming. Stay until the end to see how one desperate act changes two broken lives forever. Like this video if you love stories of underdogs who refuse to stay down, and comment which city you're watching from. The ballroom glittered like a jewel box tipped on its side, spilling light and laughter across the grand estate of Thornfield Manor. Crystal chandeliers caught the candlelight and threw it back in cascading rainbows. Silk gowns whispered across polished floors. The air smelled of roses, expensive perfume, and the particular variety of desperation that came with England's marriage season. Alara Whitford stood in the corner near the potted palms, exactly where she always stood. Not quite hidden, but certainly not seen. Her dress was last season's blue, a serviceable shade that didn't draw attention, didn't make promises, didn't suggest anything as frivolous as hope. She'd learned years ago that hope was a luxury reserved for other kinds of women. Beautiful women, marriageable women, women like her sister. Across the room, Cecilia Whitford held court like a queen among peasants, and perhaps that wasn't far from the truth. At 19, Cecilia possessed the kind of beauty that made men stupid and women vicious. Golden curls that caught the light, eyes the color of summer sky, a laugh that sounded like music boxes and champagne. She moved through the crowd trailing admirers like a comet trailing stars, utterly unaware of the gravity she created simply by existing. "Your sister is magnificent tonight," Lady Pemberton murmured, appearing at Alara's elbow with the suddenness of a hunting cat. Her smile was all teeth. "Such a shame about your father's investments, though. One does hear things." Alara's fingers tightened on her glass. "One does," she replied evenly. "One also hears about Lord Pemberton's gambling debts, but we're all too polite to mention it in mixed company." Lady Pemberton's smile froze. She drifted away like smoke, but the damage was done. The reminder hung between them like a sword. The Whitford family was drowning, and everyone knew it. 3 failed investments, 2 mortgaged properties. One last desperate hope in the form of a golden-haired girl who needed to marry well, marry soon, and marry rich enough to save them all from ruin. No pressure at all. Alara took a long drink of champagne she didn't want and watched her sister dance with Lord Ashworth, a third son with moderate prospects and a kind face. Not enough. Never enough. They needed a title, an estate, the kind of fortune that could absorb the Whitford debts like rain into parched earth. "You're brooding again." Alara didn't turn. She recognized her brother's voice, recognizing the particular blend of affection and exasperation that colored it. "I'm observing. It's different. It's depressing." Thomas appeared beside her, tall and rakish in his evening clothes, his cravat already slightly askew. At 23, he was caught in that terrible space between boyhood and manhood, old enough to see the cliff they were walking toward, but too young to know how to stop it. "You should be dancing." "I should be many things," Alara said. "Dancing isn't on the list." "Alara, don't." She softened it with a glance. "We both know how this works. Cecilia is the prize horse. I'm the stable girl who makes sure she looks good." It wasn't self-pity. It was mathematics. Alara was 24, firmly on the shelf by society's cruel accounting. She was plain where Cecilia was beautiful, practical where Cecilia was charming, invisible where Cecilia was radiant. She'd made peace with it years ago, the same way one made peace with rain or winter or any other unchangeable fact of nature. What she hadn't made peace with was failure. "Mother wants you," Thomas said, nodding toward the far end of the ballroom where their mother held court among the matrons. "Something about Cecilia's dance card." Of course. Always about Cecilia. Alara wove through the crowd with practiced invisibility, a skill she'd perfected over years of being unremarkable. No one looked at her directly. Their gazes slid past her like water off stone, seeking more interesting views. She'd become a ghost in her own life, haunting the edges of other people's stories. Her mother, Constance Whitford, stood rigid as a general surveying a battlefield, her face set in lines that had deepened considerably over the past year. Once, she'd been beautiful like Cecilia. Now she was handsome in that austere way that wealthy disappointment created. "There you are," Constance said without warmth. "Where have you been?" "Right where you can't see me," Ilara wanted to say. Instead, "Here, mother. Always here." "Lord Blackwood has been asking about Cecilia." Constance's voice dropped to urgent confidentiality. "He's been watching her all evening. This could be it, Ilara. This could be everything." Ilara followed her mother's gaze to where a man stood near the French doors, studying the crowd with the lazy attention of a predator selecting prey. Lord Nathaniel Blackwood was handsome in that particular way that wealthy men often were. Not beautiful, but confident enough that it didn't matter. Dark hair, darker eyes, a smile that probably looked charming if you didn't know what to look for. Ilara knew what to look for. She'd spent a lifetime studying people from the shadows, learning to read what others missed, and everything about Lord Blackwood set her teeth on edge. "He's too interested," Ilara said quietly. "That's the point," Constance snapped. "For God's sake, Ilara, must you find problems in every solution?" "Mother, no." Constance gripped her arm, hard enough to bruise. "No more of your skepticism. No more of your caution. We are 3 months from losing everything. The house, the land, our name, everything. If Cecilia doesn't secure a match this season, we will be destitute. Do you understand? Destitute. Living on the charity of distant relatives who barely acknowledge our existence." Ilara understood. She'd understood for months, ever since she'd overheard her father sobbing in his study at 3 a.m, whiskey bottle empty, accounting books open to pages full of red ink and broken dreams. "I understand," she said. "I just think—" "You think too much. That's always been your problem." Constance released her arm, smoothing her skirts with hands that trembled slightly. "Lord Blackwood is a second son with a considerable fortune and no scandal attached to his name. He is exactly what we need. So smile, be pleasant, and for once in your life, Ilara, be helpful instead of difficult." She swept away, leaving Ilara standing alone with her doubts and the growing certainty that something was very, very wrong. The evening crawled forward with agonizing politeness. Ilara watched as Lord Blackwood maneuvered closer to Cecilia with the skill of a chess master moving pieces. He danced with her twice, just enough to show interest without causing scandal. He laughed at her stories. He gazed at her with what looked like genuine admiration, if you didn't notice how his eyes never quite warmed, how his smile never reached past his teeth. Cecilia, bless her naive heart, glowed under his attention like a flower turning toward poisoned sunlight. "He's handsome, isn't he?" Cecilia whispered when she finally escaped his orbit, long enough to seek out Ilara during the supper interval. Her cheeks were flushed, her eyes bright. "And so attentive. Mother says he has 10,000 a year, Ilara. 10,000! Can you imagine?" Ilara could imagine. She could imagine it solving every problem, erasing every debt, restoring every lost comfort. She could also imagine why a wealthy bachelor would pursue a nearly bankrupt gentleman's daughter with such focused intensity. Nothing good came without cost. Not in this world. "He seems very taken with you," Ilara said carefully. "Perhaps too taken." "Too taken?" Cecilia laughed, the sound pure and thoughtless as birdsong. "There's no such thing. Oh, Ilara, must you always find clouds in every sky? Can't you just be happy for me?" "I am happy for you," Ilara said, and meant it. Cecilia was vain and shallow and occasionally infuriating, but she was also kind in her careless way, generous with her smiles if not her thoughts. She didn't deserve whatever game Lord Blackwood was playing. "I just want you to be careful." "Careful is for old maids and cowards." Cecilia squeezed her hand, already distracted by someone calling her name. "Don't worry so much. Everything is going to be wonderful. You'll see." She drifted away in a cloud of perfume and optimism, leaving Ilara alone with her dread. But the revelation came at midnight, in the way that terrible truths often did, accidentally, in the wrong place at the wrong time. Alara had escaped to the library seeking refuge from the suffocating gaiety of the ballroom. The Thornfield Library was a beautiful space, all dark wood and leather bindings, and the particular smell of old paper and older secrets. She'd found a corner, curled into a wing-back chair, and was attempting to lose herself in a volume of poetry when voices drifted through the half-open door. Male voices, low and conspiratorial. Absolutely certain. That was Lord Blackwood, his cultured accent taking on a rougher edge in private. The family is that desperate? Completely. Alara didn't recognize the second voice, someone younger, eager. The father's a fool who invested in every failed venture from here to the Indies. They're drowning in debt. The mother's been shopping the girl around like a prize mare at auction. Blackwood laughed. It was not a kind sound. Perfect. Makes this almost too easy. You're really going through with it, then? The wager? Of course. Matthews challenged me, didn't he? Said I couldn't ruin a respectable girl within a single season. £5,000 says I can, and with the Whitford chit I won't even have to try very hard. She's already halfway in love with me. Alara's hands tightened on the book until her knuckles went white. Seems cruel, the younger man ventured. She's just a girl. She's a commodity, Blackwood corrected coldly, and not even a particularly valuable one, given her family's circumstances. I'll court her, compromise her, nothing too scandalous, just enough to ruin her reputation, and then I'll end the engagement. She'll be unsaleable goods. I win the wager, Matthews loses his money, and the girl learns a valuable lesson about reaching above her station. And if you're caught? I won't be. I'm always careful. Besides, who would believe her? A desperate fortune hunter claiming she was seduced by a wealthy lord? Society will call her a liar trying to trap me into marriage. They always do. The voices moved away, fading toward the billiards room, leaving Alara alone in the sudden silence. She sat frozen, the poetry book forgotten in her lap, her mind racing through implications and consequences like a horse bolting through fire. A wager. A deliberate, calculated plot to ruin Cecilia for sport, for money, for the casual entertainment of bored aristocrats with too much wealth and too little conscience, and no one would believe them if they tried to expose it. Blackwood was right about that. Society protected its own, and wealthy lords were better protected than naive girls from failing families. Unless they had proof. Alara stood slowly, setting down the book with hands that had begun to shake. Not from fear, though fear was certainly present, coiling in her stomach like cold snakes, but also from something else, something that felt dangerously like fury. She'd spent 24 years being invisible, being practical, being the good daughter who never caused problems, never made scenes, never stepped out of the neat little box society had built for unmarriageable women. And where had it gotten her? Watching from the shadows while predators circled her sister, powerless, voiceless, irrelevant. Not anymore. Alara slipped from the library, her mind already working through the problem with the methodical precision she usually reserved for household accounts and logistical planning. Blackwood had mentioned a wager. Wagers meant documentation, notes, letters, something written down because wealthy men were careless with their cruelty, never expecting consequences. If she could find that documentation, she could expose him. She could save Cecilia. She could prove that even invisible women could matter when they decided to stop hiding. The rational part of her brain screamed warnings. This was insane, dangerous, potentially ruinous. If she was caught breaking into a lord's private rooms, her reputation would be destroyed. Her family would be finished. But they were already finished, weren't they? One way led to certain destruction via Blackwood's scheme. The other led to possible destruction via her own desperate gambit. At least the second option gave them a fighting chance. The ball continued around her, oblivious. Couples danced. Gossip flowed like wine. Cecilia laughed at something a young gentleman said, innocent and doomed. Alara made her way through the crowd like a shadow moving through light, unnoticed and unremarked. She knew Thornfield Manor well enough. The Whitfords had been invited here often over the years when their fortunes were better. She knew the layout, knew that the guest quarters occupied the entire east wing, knew that Lord Blackwood had been given the Crimson Room, 3 doors down from the main staircase. Knew that in another hour the men would retreat to the smoking room for cigars and brandy, leaving the upper floors unguarded. She just had to wait, had to be patient, had to be brave in ways she'd never been brave before. Alara returned to her post near the potted palms, invisible again, watching and waiting as the clock hands crawled toward 1 in the morning. Mom. The house settled into drowsy quiet as the hour grew late. The orchestra played softer melodies. Older guests began making their excuses, retiring to their rooms. The young people grew bolder, their laughter louder, their flirtations less subtle. Chaperones wearied. Rules relaxed. Perfect. Alara waited until she saw Lord Blackwood join a group of gentlemen heading toward the smoking room, then counted to 100 to be certain. Her heart hammered against her ribs like a trapped bird. Her palms were damp. Every instinct screamed at her to stop this madness, return to safety, accept defeat with grace. She ignored them all. The east wing hallway stretched before her, dimly lit by wall sconces that cast more shadow than light. Her footsteps sounded impossibly loud on the thick carpet. Every creak of floorboards felt like a gunshot. She forced herself to breathe steadily, to move with purpose rather than panic. The Crimson Room's door was unlocked, careless, arrogant, typical. Alara slipped inside and closed it softly behind her. The room was elegant in that casually expensive way that wealthy men preferred. Dark wood furniture, burgundy curtains, a large bed that probably cost more than her family's annual income. A writing desk sat near the window, papers scattered across its surface in careless disarray. There. That's where he would keep it. Alara crossed the room on trembling legs and began searching through the papers with careful desperation. Bills, letters from his tailor, an invitation to some shooting party. Nothing, nothing, nothing. Her fingers closed on a folded sheet of expensive paper, sealed with red wax. The seal was already broken. She unfolded it with hands that shook so badly she nearly tore the paper. Blackwood, the wager stands. £5,000 says you can't ruin the Whitford girl before season's end without getting caught. Make her fall in love, compromise her thoroughly, then break the engagement publicly. Bonus 1,000 if you can make her family blame her for the failure. Matthews, P.S. Make it entertaining. I'm paying good money for this. The words blurred as Alara stared at them. Such casual cruelty, such careless destruction of a human life, reduced to entertainment value and monetary stakes. She'd found it, the proof, the weapon. Now she just had to escape with it. Alara refolded the letter with careful precision and tucked it into her bodice, her mind already racing toward the next problem: how to get out of the room, down the hallway, back to safety without being caught. The door seemed very far away suddenly. The hallway beyond it felt like miles of exposure. She was halfway to the door when it opened. Alara froze, her blood turning to ice, every muscle locking in place as a man stepped into the room. Not Lord Blackwood, someone taller, broader, with the kind of presence that changed the temperature of a space simply by existing. He closed the door behind him with deliberate calm, then turned to look at her with eyes the color of winter storms. "Well," said the Duke of Ashenmore, his voice low and cold and perfectly controlled. "This is unexpected." Severin Vale, the Duke of Ashenmore, was not a man people approached willingly. He was the sort of aristocrat that mothers warned their daughters about, not because he was a rake or a scoundrel, but because he was something far more dangerous. He was brilliant, ruthless, and completely uninterested in the games society played. He was also, according to every whispered rumor Alara had ever heard, utterly without mercy, and she was trapped in his room. Her mind went blank with panic for 3 full seconds before logic reasserted itself with brutal clarity. This was the wrong room. The Crimson Room was 3 doors down. She'd miscounted in the dimness. She'd entered the Duke's chambers by mistake and been caught red-handed. "I can explain," Alara said, then realized how absurd that sounded. "Can you?" The Duke moved further into the room with the fluid grace of a predator who knew he had his prey cornered. He was dressed for the evening but had removed his jacket, his shirt sleeves rolled to reveal forearms that suggested he did more than sit in parliamentary sessions. His dark hair was slightly disheveled, as though he'd been running his hands through it. "This should be enlightening. Most young ladies who enter my rooms uninvited at least have the courtesy to arrive via invitation. I wasn't. Alara's voice cracked. She cleared her throat, forced steel into her spine. She'd come this far. She might as well die honest. I wasn't looking for you, Your Grace. I was looking for Lord Blackwood's room. One dark eyebrow rose. Were you? I was. She lifted her chin, meeting his eyes directly, even though everything in her wanted to look away from that cold, measuring gaze. I needed something he had, something important. How intriguing. The Duke crossed to a sideboard, poured himself a glass of amber liquid without offering her one. His movements were controlled, economical, suggesting a man who wasted neither motion nor words. And did you find this important thing in my room? No, because this is your room. I miscounted the doors. An honest thief. How refreshing. He took a slow sip, studying her over the rim of the glass. Most people caught in such circumstances resort to tears or seduction. You're remarkably composed for someone about to be ruined. The word hung between them like a blade. Ruined. That's what happened to women who were caught in men's bedrooms. It didn't matter that she'd entered by mistake. Didn't matter that nothing had happened. Society didn't traffic in truth, it trafficked in appearance, and the appearance of impropriety was all it took to destroy a woman's life. Unless... Are you going to ruin me? Alara asked, keeping her voice steady through sheer force of will. That depends. The Duke set down his glass. On whether you tell me the truth. All of it. And quickly, we have perhaps 5 minutes before someone notices your absence and comes looking. Alara calculated odds and options with desperate speed. She could lie, could invent some romantic story about a secret correspondence with Blackwood, play the lovelorn girl caught in a mistake. But the Duke was watching her with eyes that suggested he'd heard every lie society could invent, and this man didn't seem like someone who rewarded dishonesty. Lord Blackwood has made a wager, she said, the words tumbling out in a rush. £5,000 that he can ruin my sister before season's end, court her, compromise her, then break the engagement publicly and blame her for the failure. I overheard him talking about it in the library. I was trying to find proof, a letter, a note, something I could use to expose him before he destroys my family. The Duke's expression didn't change, but something shifted in his eyes, a flicker of something that might have been interest or calculation. With him, it was hard to tell the difference. Your sister is Miss Cecilia Whitford, he said. Not a question, a statement. The diamond everyone's been buzzing about. Yes. And you are? No one. The words came out more bitter than she'd intended. I'm Alara, the other sister. The invisible one. Invisible, the Duke repeated, and there was something almost amused in his tone. Yet here you are, breaking into a lord's room to steal evidence of conspiracy. That doesn't sound particularly invisible to me. It's the first brave thing I've done in my life, Alara said. And I got it wrong. I entered the wrong room. I failed before I even started. Did you? The Duke moved closer, and Alara had to fight the urge to back away. Not from fear, exactly, though there was certainly that, but from the sheer intensity of his presence. He was the kind of man who bent reality around himself through pure force of will. What door were you actually looking for? The Crimson Room, 3 doors down. Ah, Blackwood's room. The Duke tilted his head slightly, studying her with unsettling focus. And what were you planning to do with this proof once you found it? Use it, expose him, save my sister, and ruin yourself in the process? Probably. Alara met his gaze steadily. But at least I'd go down fighting instead of watching from the shadows while everything falls apart. Silence stretched between them, broken only by the distant sounds of music drifting up from the ballroom below. The Duke continued to study her with that unnerving intensity, as though she were a puzzle he was solving piece by piece. Finally, he spoke. The Crimson Room has a window that overlooks the garden, he said. The lock on that window hasn't worked properly in 3 years. If someone were to, say, access that window from the outside via the terrace trellis, they could enter the room without using the hallway. Alara stared at him. Why are you telling me this? Because I despise men like Blackwood. The words were flat, emotionless, somehow all the more chilling for their lack of passion. Because wagers that destroy lives for entertainment deserve to be punished. And because you, Miss Elara Whitford, just showed more courage than most men I know, even if you did bungle the execution. So you're helping me? I'm providing information. The Duke returned to his sideboard, refilled his glass with the careful precision of a man performing ritual. What you do with that information is entirely your decision, though I would suggest you move quickly. The smoking room cigars are nearly finished. He was giving her a chance, an impossible, dangerous, completely insane chance. Elara should have thanked him, should have fled, should have abandoned this entire mad scheme and returned to safety. Instead, she heard herself ask, "Why?" The Duke paused, glass halfway to his lips. For just a moment, something that might have been pain flickered across his features, there and gone so fast she might have imagined it. "Because no one helped me when I needed it," he said quietly, "and I've regretted that silence every day since." Then the moment passed. He drank. The mask of cold control slipped back into place. "Now get out of my room before someone sees you leaving," he said. "And Miss Whitford, the terrace trellis is stronger than it looks. Don't hesitate on the climb." Elara's hands were still shaking when she slipped back into the hallway. The Duke's door closed behind her with a soft click that sounded like a gunshot in the silence. Her heart hammered so violently she was certain anyone passing could hear it, a drumbeat of guilt and terror and something dangerously close to exhilaration. She'd been caught, exposed, confronted by the most dangerous man in England, and somehow, impossibly, he'd helped her. The hallway stretched before her like a gauntlet. 3 doors down, the Crimson Room, Lord Blackwood's lair. She forced her feet to move, each step an act of will against every instinct screaming at her to run, to hide, to return to the safety of invisibility. But there was no safety anymore. Not really. Safety was an illusion they'd all been clinging to while their world crumbled around them. Blackwood's wager had simply made the collapse visible. The door to the Crimson Room loomed before her. Elara pressed her ear against the wood, listening for any sound of occupation. Nothing. Just the distant thrum of music from below and the rush of blood in her own ears. Her hand closed on the doorknob. It turned smoothly, unlocked, inviting her into disaster. She stepped inside. The Crimson Room lived up to its name, deep burgundy walls, heavy velvet curtains the color of dried blood, furniture that gleamed with old money and older arrogance. It smelled of expensive cologne and leather and the particular variety of entitlement that came with never having been told no. Elara moved to the window first, following the Duke's instructions like a map through dangerous territory. The window overlooked the garden, exactly as he'd said. She could see the terrace below, the trellis climbing the wall like a ladder made of wood and hubris. The lock was indeed broken. The window opened with barely a touch, letting in a rush of cool night air that smelled of roses and possibility. Her escape route, if she needed it, when she needed it. Elara turned to the writing desk, her movements quick and efficient now that she'd committed to this madness. The desk was messier than the Duke's had been, papers scattered without care, ink stains on the blotter, a half-empty glass of brandy leaving rings on important-looking documents. She rifled through the chaos with desperate precision. A letter from his banker, racing forms, an invitation to someone's country estate. Bills, bills, more bills. Apparently Lord Blackwood spent money as carelessly as he spent lives. Nothing. Nothing that looked like... Wait. Her fingers brushed against a leather portfolio tucked beneath a stack of correspondence. It was locked, the kind of small brass lock that wealthy men used to protect things they considered valuable or incriminating. Elara grabbed a letter opener from the desk and jimmied the lock with hands that had suddenly stopped shaking. Practicality was a wonderful antidote to fear. The lock gave with a satisfying click. Inside the portfolio, letters, dozens of them, all in different hands, all bearing the names and seals of various gentlemen. Wagers. All wagers. Elara's stomach turned as she read through them quickly, her eyes catching phrases that made her want to scrub her brain clean. The Fairfax Girl by Michaelmas. 3 different virgins in one season. Make her beg, then make her weep. These men treated women like game pieces, like objects to be used, broken, and discarded for sport. and they documented their cruelty with the casual confidence of people who never expected consequences. She found the letter about Cecilia near the bottom of the stack. Matthew's handwriting, bold and careless. Blackwood. The Whitford wager stands. £5,000 says you can't ruin her before season's end. Full details. Make her fall in love with you, compromise her thoroughly enough to destroy her marriage prospects, then end the engagement publicly with maximum humiliation. Bonus 1,000 if you can turn the family against her. Make them blame her for being too forward or misunderstanding your intentions. Rules. No actual violence. Must maintain plausible deniability in public. The fun is in the social destruction, not physical harm. Put your money where your reputation is. I've already told Hensworth and Carrington about this. They're betting on your success. Matthews. The paper crinkled in Alara's grip. She forced herself to breathe, to think past the red haze of fury that threatened to overwhelm her. This was it. The proof. The weapon. She folded the letter carefully and tucked it into her bodice alongside the one she'd found earlier. Then, because she was already damned and might as well be thorough, she grabbed 2 more letters. Evidence of other men, other wagers, other girls who might not have anyone to protect them. The portfolio went back under the correspondence. The desk returned to its careful chaos. Alara moved toward the window, her exit secured, her mission accomplished. Footsteps in the hallway. Male voices drawing closer. Tell you, the brandy here is superior to anything Matthews stocks. That was Blackwood's voice, cultured and amused and utterly unconcerned. Should have stayed for the cards. A second voice, younger. Hensworth was about to lose his shirt. They were coming here. To this room. Seconds away from opening that door and finding her. Alara's mind went blank with panic for half a heartbeat, then snapped into crystalline focus. The window. She had to go now. No hesitation, no second thoughts. The Duke had said the trellis was stronger than it looked. She had to trust that assessment because she had no other choice. She hiked up her skirts with one hand, climbed onto the window ledge with movements made graceful by sheer desperation, and swung herself out into the night air. The trellis caught her weight with a groan of stressed wood. "Don't look down," she commanded herself, even as her treacherous eyes insisted on showing her exactly how high up she was. 2 stories. Maybe 3. High enough that a fall would break bones, possibly her neck, definitely her future. She descended with the jerky efficiency of someone who'd never climbed anything more adventurous than a stepladder. Her dress caught on the trellis, tore with a sound that made her wince. Her hands scraped against rough wood. Her shoes. God, her shoes were completely wrong for this. Smooth soles sliding against the lattice. Above her, the window she'd just vacated illuminated as someone lit the lamps inside. Voices drifted out, muffled by distance and the pounding of her heart. "Could have sworn I left that closed. You're getting paranoid in your old age." Alara froze halfway down the trellis, pressed against the wall like a spider caught in lamplight. If they looked out, if they saw her. But they didn't look. The window remained open, the curtains shifting in the breeze, but no face appeared. The voices moved away from the window, deeper into the room, arguing about something inconsequential. She started climbing down again, faster now, reckless with the need to be anywhere but here. The ground seemed to take forever to arrive. When her feet finally touched the flagstones of the terrace, she nearly sobbed with relief. The garden spread before her in moonlit shadows, manicured hedges, rose bushes, gravel paths that would crunch underfoot and announce her escape. She needed to get back inside, back to the ballroom, back to her place near the potted palms where invisible women belonged. But the terrace doors were locked from the inside. Of course they were. It was after midnight. The servants had secured the house. Alara pressed her forehead against the cold glass, fighting down a laugh that would have sounded too much like hysteria. She'd stolen the evidence. She'd escaped detection. She'd climbed down a trellis in evening dress and survived. And now she was locked out of the house like some gothic heroine in a penny novel. Problems? Alara spun around, her hand flying to her chest where the stolen letters crinkled against her corset. The Duke of Ashenmore stood in the shadows near the rose bushes, smoking a cheroot with the casual elegance of a man who did nothing casually. "You followed me," Alara said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I wanted to see if you'd actually do it." He took a long drag, the ember glowing red in the darkness. Most people talk themselves out of courage once they're alone with their conscience. I didn't have time for my conscience. Alara glanced back at the locked doors. I need to get inside. Obviously. The Duke crushed out the cheroot beneath his heel. The east entrance is still unlocked. The servants use it for late deliveries, but you'll need to circle around through the hedge maze to reach it without being seen from the windows. You seem to know a lot about breaking into houses. I know a lot about everything. He said it without arrogance, just flat statement of fact. It's tedious, mostly. Very little surprises me anymore. Did I surprise you? Considerably. The Duke moved closer, and Alara caught the scent of tobacco and something darker, sandalwood maybe, or cedar. Expensive things. You're either remarkably brave or remarkably stupid. I haven't decided which. Can I be both? A ghost of a smile crossed his face, there and gone so fast she might have imagined it. Come on, before someone notices you're missing and this entire exercise becomes pointless. He led her through the garden with the sure-footed confidence of someone who'd mapped every shadow, every hiding place. Alara followed, her ruined dress dragging through the dew-wet grass, her hair coming loose from its pins. She must look like exactly what she was, a woman who'd just climbed down the side of a building in pursuit of justice, or revenge, or whatever this was. The hedge maze loomed before them, dark and labyrinthine. The Duke navigated it without hesitation, turning left and right with practiced ease. Alara hurried after him, brambles catching at her skirts, her breath coming in short gasps. You do this often? She asked. Rescue women from gardens in the middle of the night? Never. The Duke glanced back at her. You're the first to require such specific assistance. Lucky me. They emerged from the maze near the east wing. True to his word, a small servant's entrance stood slightly ajar, light spilling out into the darkness. The Duke gestured toward it with mock gallantry. Your escape route, Miss Whitford. Try not to get caught between here and respectability. Alara hesitated, one hand on the doorframe. Why are you helping me? Really? The Duke's expression shuddered, that wall of cold control slamming back into place. Because I told you, I despise men like Blackwood. That's not all of it. No. He looked away toward the darkened garden, his jaw tight. But it's all I'm willing to discuss with a woman I met an hour ago. Now go, before your luck runs out. Alara wanted to press, to dig deeper into whatever pain lurked behind those winter storm eyes. But she was out of time, out of luck, and out of her depth with a man like him. Thank you, she said instead, for the information, for the help, for not ruining me when you had every right to. Don't thank me yet. The Duke's voice followed her into the house, soft and somehow ominous. The hard part is still coming. The door closed behind her, shutting out the night and its strange savior. Alara leaned against the wall, her legs shaking now that the immediate danger had passed. The letters crinkled against her chest with every breath. Evidence, ammunition, proof that she wasn't crazy, wasn't paranoid, wasn't seeing threats where none existed. But having proof and wielding it were two entirely different problems. She needed to get back to the ballroom, needed to be seen, establish her presence, make sure no one had noticed her absence. Then she needed to figure out how to destroy Lord Blackwood without destroying herself in the process. First things first, repair the damage. Her dress was torn, her hair disheveled, her hands scraped raw. She looked like she'd been wrestling with hedges, which technically she had. Alara found a servant's washroom and cleaned herself as best she could. The torn section of her dress could be pinned back if she was careful. Her hair went back into its simple knot, a few strategic pins hiding the worst of the disarray. The scrapes on her palms would have to be concealed with gloves, which she'd foolishly left in her reticule somewhere in the ballroom. It would have to do. She made her way back through the servants' corridors with the quiet confidence of someone who'd spent years being overlooked. Servants didn't question her presence. She had the look of minor gentry, not important enough to challenge, not suspicious enough to report. The ballroom noise grew louder as she approached. Music, laughter, the clink of glasses. Normal life continuing while she'd been out risking everything for a sister who didn't even know she was in danger. Alara slipped back into the ballroom through a side entrance, scanning the crowd for familiar faces. There, her mother, talking with Lady Pemberton near the refreshment table. Thomas, flirting with someone's daughter by the windows, and Cecilia, radiant and oblivious, dancing with Lord Ashworth again. No one had noticed her absence. She was too invisible for that. Relief and bitterness mixed in equal measure. At least it made betraying society's rules easier when society couldn't be bothered to notice you breaking them. There you are, Cecilia materialized at her elbow, flushed and breathless from dancing. I've been looking everywhere for you. Lord Blackwood asked if you might be persuaded to play something on the pianoforte. He says he's heard you're quite accomplished. Alara's stomach dropped. He asked about me? Isn't it sweet? Cecilia squeezed her arm. He wants to make a good impression on the whole family. He says that matters to him. Oh, Alara, I think he might be serious about courting me. Mother will be so pleased. Cecilia. Alara caught her sister's hand, gripping it hard enough to make the younger girl wince. Listen to me. Lord Blackwood is not what he seems. Cecilia's smile faltered. What do you mean? But what could she say? I broke into his room and stole evidence of a wager to ruin you. I climbed down a trellis and got help from a duke? The truth sounded insane even in her own head. You should be careful, very careful. Don't let him maneuver you into any situation where you're alone with him. Alara, you're being ridiculous. I'm being realistic. Alara kept her voice low, urgent. Promise me. No private walks in the garden. No unchaperoned moments. Nothing that could be misconstrued or used against you? Cecilia pulled her hand away, her expression shifting from confusion to annoyance. You're jealous. That's what this is. You can't stand that someone is finally interested in me, that I might actually have a chance at happiness. That's not... It is! Cecilia's voice rose, drawing glances from nearby guests. She lowered it again, but the hurt remained. You've always been this way, Alara. Always finding problems, always assuming the worst. Just because you're too plain to attract attention doesn't mean I should suffer for it. The words hit like slaps, all the more painful for their casual cruelty. Cecilia didn't even realize how deeply she was cutting. That was the worst part. She was simply speaking what she believed to be obvious truth. I'm trying to protect you, Alara said quietly. I don't need protection. I need you to be happy for me for once. Can you do that? Can you just smile and support me instead of always playing the worried old maid? Before Alara could respond, Lord Blackwood himself appeared, materializing between them with the practiced timing of a stage magician. Up close, his handsomeness took on a calculating edge, smile too practiced, eyes too assessing. Ladies, he said smoothly, I hope I'm not interrupting. Not at all. Cecilia's anger vanished beneath a bright smile. Alara was just saying how delighted she is about your interest in our family. Was she? Blackwood turned that calculating gaze on Alara, and she saw the exact moment he truly looked at her, not as an obstacle or irrelevance, but as a potential threat. How gratifying. I do so value family approval. Then you'll be disappointed, Alara said before she could stop herself, because I don't approve, not at all. The silence that followed could have shattered crystal. Cecilia's face went white with mortification. Blackwood's smile never wavered, but something cold flickered in his eyes. Alara, Cecilia hissed, apologize now. I don't think I will. How intriguing. Blackwood cocked his head, studying her with new interest. Most older sisters are delighted when their younger siblings receive attention from eligible gentlemen, but you seem to have reservations, Miss Alara. Might I ask why? Because you're a monster playing games with people's lives, Alara wanted to say. Because I know about the wager, about the plan, about everything you intend to do. But she couldn't say that. Not here, not now, not without proof she could present publicly. The letters hidden against her chest might as well have been burning coals. Call it instinct, she said instead. I'm very good at reading people, Lord Blackwood, and I read you as someone who enjoys games more than commitments. Then you read me wrong. His smile sharpened. I'm deadly serious when I find something I want. The words hung between them like a threat, and both of them knew it. This was a man who just realized he had an opponent, that the invisible sister might not be as blind as he'd assumed, dangerous. She'd made this dangerous for herself, but she'd also planted doubt, made him wonder if his secret was as safe as he'd believed. If you'll excuse me, Alara said, I have a headache coming on. She fled before Cecilia could protest, before Blackwood could say something else that would force her hand. Her mother would be furious later. Insulting an eligible suitor was social suicide. But that was a problem for tomorrow. Tonight, she needed to figure out her next move. Alara made her way to the ladies' retiring room, a sanctuary where women could repair their facades away from male scrutiny. It was empty except for a maid dozing in the corner. She sank into a chair before the mirror and stared at her reflection. She looked the same. Plain face, forgettable features, practical dress. Nothing about her appearance suggested she'd just committed multiple felonies and started a war with a peer of the realm. The door opened. Alara tensed, expecting Cecilia or her mother coming to deliver a well-deserved lecture. Instead, Lady Margaret Ashworth entered, a widow in her 40s, known for her wit and her ruthlessly accurate social commentary. She caught Alara's eye in the mirror and smiled. "That was quite the performance," Lady Margaret said, settling into the chair beside her. "Cutting Blackwood off at the knees in front of your sister. Brave or foolish, I can't decide which." "Does it matter?" Alara asked tiredly. "Usually not. The outcomes are generally the same." Lady Margaret pulled out a compact, checked her own reflection with critical efficiency. "But I'm curious, what makes you think he's unsuitable? Most mothers in your position would be throwing their daughters at him." Alara measured her response carefully. Lady Margaret was influential, connected, dangerous in her own right. But she was also known for her hatred of hypocrisy and her protection of young women navigating society's treacherous waters. A potential ally. If Alara played this right. "What would you say," Alara began slowly, "if I told you Lord Blackwood was courting my sister as part of a wager? That he intends to ruin her for sport?" Lady Margaret's hand stilled on her compact. She turned to look at Alara directly, her gaze sharp as cut glass. "I would say that's a very serious accusation, the kind that could destroy your family if you can't prove it." She paused. "Can you prove it?" Alara's hand moved to her bodice, feeling the crinkle of paper beneath the fabric. "Yes." "Show me." It was madness. Showing evidence to someone she barely knew, trusting a woman whose motives might be as tangled as anyone else's. But Alara was out of safe options. She needed help from someone who understood how society worked, who could help her navigate the destruction of a peer without getting crushed in the process. She pulled out the letters with shaking hands and passed them to Lady Margaret. The widow read in silence, her expression growing colder with each line. When she finished, she looked up at Alara with something that might have been respect. "Where did you get these?" "I'd rather not say." "Of course you'd rather not. You stole them." Lady Margaret's mouth curved in a smile that would have made sharks nervous. "From Blackwood's room, I assume? Bold, stupid, but bold. Do you have any idea what he'll do if he realizes you have these?" "Probably something terrible." "Definitely something terrible. Men like Blackwood don't take kindly to being outmaneuvered by women they consider beneath them." Lady Margaret refolded the letters with careful precision. "The question is, what do you intend to do with this information?" "Expose him. Stop him from ruining my sister." "Noble. Also impossible, the way you're thinking of doing it." Lady Margaret stood, pacing the small room with restless energy. "You can't just wave these letters around and expect society to care. Half the men in that ballroom have probably made similar wagers. They'll close ranks, protect their own. You'll be labeled a thief and a liar, your family will be ruined, and Blackwood will emerge with his reputation intact." Alara's heart sank. "Then what do I do?" "You use it strategically, quietly. You go to Blackwood directly and make him understand that courting your sister would be inadvisable. You imply that you have information without revealing exactly what. You make him choose between pursuing the wager and protecting his reputation. He'll just deny everything." "Of course he will, but the seed of doubt will be planted. He'll wonder who else knows, what else might come to light. Men like him are cowards underneath the charm. They'll retreat rather than risk exposure." Lady Margaret handed the letters back. "Keep these safe. They're your insurance policy." "And if he doesn't retreat? If he pushes forward anyway?" Lady Margaret's smile turned predatory. "Then we escalate, but subtly. Society is a game, my dear. The trick is to make your opponent destroy himself while looking like you had nothing to do with it. A knock at the door interrupted them. The maid stirred, moved to answer it. "Miss Whitford?" A footman's voice. "Your mother is looking for you. She requests your immediate presence in the Rose Room." Alara exchanged a glance with Lady Margaret. The Rose Room was where family disciplinary discussions happened, private enough for harsh words, public enough to maintain decorum. She was about to be eviscerated. "Go," Lady Margaret said. "Face the consequences of your bravery. But remember, you're not alone in this anymore. I'll be watching, helping where I can." "Why?" Alara had to ask. "Why help me at all?" "Because 30 years ago, I was a foolish girl who trusted the wrong man. No one helped me. I've spent 3 decades making sure other girls don't suffer the same fate." Lady Margaret's expression softened fractionally. "You did something impossible tonight, Alara Whitford. You stepped out of the shadows and fought back. That deserves support, even if you made a mess of it." Alara tucked the letters back into her bodice and straightened her spine. Time to face her mother's fury. The Rose Room was aptly named, decorated in shades of pink that would have been charming if not for the tension crackling in the air. Her mother stood by the window, rigid with barely contained rage. Thomas leaned against the mantelpiece, looking uncomfortable. Cecilia sat in a chair, her eyes red from crying. "Sit," Constance commanded. Alara sat. "Explain yourself." Her mother's voice was ice over granite. "Explain why you just insulted one of the season's most eligible bachelors in front of half of society. Explain why you deliberately sabotaged your sister's best chance at saving this family from ruin." "I was trying to protect her." "Protect her?" Constance laughed, the sound bitter and sharp. "From what? From a wealthy, titled gentleman who's shown genuine interest? From the kind of match we desperately need? From being used as entertainment in a cruel wager?" Alara's control snapped. "Blackwood doesn't love her. He doesn't even like her. He's courting her because he bet £5,000 he could ruin her before season's end. It's a game to him, Mother. A sport." Silence crashed into the room like a wave. "That's absurd," Constance said finally, but doubt flickered in her eyes. "It's true. I have proof." Alara pulled out one of the letters, not the one about Cecilia specifically, but one of the others. Evidence that such wagers existed, that men really did this. "They're real, Mother. These men destroy women for entertainment and document their cruelty because they never expect consequences." Thomas took the letter, read it, and went pale. "Christ," he muttered. "Language," Constance snapped automatically, but she was staring at the letter with dawning horror. Cecilia stood abruptly, snatching the paper from Thomas's hands. She read it once, twice, her face cycling through disbelief, understanding, and finally devastation. "This is real?" Her voice cracked. "Men really do this?" "Some men," Alara said gently. "The worst kind. And Blackwood is one of them." "You don't know that for certain," Constance protested, but her conviction was crumbling. "Just because some men make such wagers doesn't mean he—" "I have his letter too." Alara pulled it out, held it up but didn't pass it over yet. The one specifically about Cecilia. About the plan to compromise her, ruin her, then blame her for the failure. It's all detailed, Mother. Everything. Cecilia made a sound between a sob and a laugh. "So all of it was a lie? Every smile, every compliment, every—" She broke off, pressing her hands to her mouth. "I'm sorry," Alara said, and meant it. Better to have her sister hurt now than destroyed later, but that didn't make this moment any easier. "Where did you get these letters?" Constance demanded, her mind clearly racing ahead to implications and consequences. "I stole them." No point lying now. "From his room, tonight. I overheard him discussing the wager, and I knew no one would believe me without proof, so I—" "You broke into a lord's bedchamber?" Constance swayed slightly. "Alara, do you have any idea what you've done? If anyone finds out, they won't. I was careful." "Careful?" Her mother's voice climbed toward hysteria. "There is no careful when it comes to something like this. If even a whisper gets out that you were in his room, you'll be ruined. We'll all be ruined. Everything will have been for nothing. Better ruined with dignity than destroyed by a monster," Alara said flatly. The truth of it hung in the air, inescapable. They'd been so focused on surviving that they'd nearly fed Cecilia to a predator. And if Alara hadn't overheard that conversation, hadn't taken the insane risk of stealing proof, they would never have known until it was too late. "What do we do now?" Thomas asked quietly. "We cut him off," Alara said. "Publicly, but politely. Cecilia develops a sudden preference for someone else. Mother cools toward him. We make it clear without saying why that he's no longer welcome to court her. And if he pushes, demands an explanation, we hold firm, and if necessary," Alara's hand went to the letters again, "we show him what we know, not publicly, just to him. Make him understand that pursuing this would be inadvisable." "Blackmail," Constance whispered. "Insurance," Alara corrected. "Self-defense. Whatever you want to call it that makes you feel better. But we can't let him near Cecilia again. Ever." Cecilia stood abruptly and crossed to Alara. For a moment, Alara thought her sister might slap her. Instead, Cecilia pulled her into a fierce hug. "You climbed down a building for me," Cecilia said, her voice muffled against Alara's shoulder. "You risked everything. I called you jealous and plain, and—" She pulled back, tears streaming. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." "You didn't know. I should have listened. You're always right about these things, and I never—" Cecilia broke off, laughing through tears. "You're the brave one, not me. I just stand around looking pretty while you actually do things." "Looking pretty is its own skill," Alara said, "and you're good at it." The moment of sisterly reconciliation was interrupted by another knock at the door. "What now?" Constance snapped. The footman entered, looking apologetic. "Begging your pardon, ma'am, but the Duke of Ashenmore requests a word with Miss Alara Whitford, in private." The room went very still. "Why would the Duke want to speak with Alara?" Thomas asked. "I have no idea," Alara lied, her pulse jumping. What was he doing? They'd parted ways in the garden. He'd made it clear he was done helping. Why seek her out now? "You should go," Constance said, still reeling from too many revelations. "But Alara, be careful. The Duke is not a man to trifle with." "I'm aware." Alara followed the footman down corridors that seemed longer than they had hours ago, her mind racing. The Duke waited in a small study, standing by the fire with his back to her. The door closed, leaving them alone. "You sent for me?" Alara kept her voice neutral. The Duke turned, and the expression on his face stopped her breath. Not cold anymore, not controlled. Something raw and fierce burned in those winter storm eyes. "Blackwood knows," he said. "He just checked his room. The letters are missing, and he's looking for the thief." The words landed like stones in still water, sending ripples of panic through Alara's chest. "He knows?" "He knows the letters are missing." The Duke moved away from the fire, his movements controlled but urgent. "Whether he knows who took them is another question, but he's not subtle when he's angry. I overheard him rallying his friends, Matthews, Hensworth, Carrington. They're conducting what he's calling a discreet investigation. How discreet can it be? He can't exactly announce that someone stole evidence of his criminal conspiracy. He doesn't need to announce anything. He just needs to identify the thief and destroy them quietly." The Duke's jaw tightened. Men like Blackwood are experts at making problems disappear. Usually the problems are women who know too much. Alara's hands closed into fists, the letters still pressed against her chest like armor made of paper. "What do you suggest I do? Return them? Pretend this never happened? No, you've already committed. Retreating now would be suicide. He'd know you're the one who broke in, and he'd retaliate." The Duke paced the small study like a caged wolf. "But you need to move faster than planned. Whatever you are going to do with that evidence, do it now, tonight, before he has time to build a defense or identify you as the culprit." "Tonight?" Alara's mind raced. "I was going to approach him quietly, show him I had the letters, force him to withdraw his suit." "That plan just died. If you approach him now, you'll be walking into a trap. He's paranoid, furious, and surrounded by allies who'll back whatever story he invents." The Duke stopped pacing, fixed her with that intense gaze. "You need to go public, immediately. Make the information so widespread that killing the messenger becomes pointless." "Public how? I can't just stand up in the ballroom and read his correspondence." "Why not?" The question hung between them, absurd and brilliant and absolutely terrifying. Because it would ruin me, Alara said. Everyone would know I stole private letters. I'd be branded a thief, a liar, probably insane. My family would be destroyed by association. Your family is already being destroyed. At least this way you choose the manner of your destruction. The Duke's voice softened fractionally. I'm not saying it's a good option, Miss Whitford. I'm saying it's the only option you have left. Blackwood is hunting. You can either hide and wait for him to find you, or you can strike first and make the whole thing too public to bury. Alara's breath came short and fast. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. She'd imagined a quiet confrontation, a strategic application of leverage, a neat resolution that saved Cecilia without sacrificing herself. But life wasn't neat, and men like Blackwood didn't respond to quiet threats. They responded to public humiliation. If I do this, she said slowly, if I expose him publicly, I need you to back my story. The Duke went very still. Excuse me? You heard him too, in the smoking room or wherever you were when you overheard his investigation. You can corroborate that such wagers exist, that men really do this. Alara stepped closer, desperation making her bold. I need someone with unimpeachable credibility to stand beside me when I make these accusations. Otherwise, it's just a hysteric woman waving stolen letters and screaming about conspiracies. You're asking me to involve myself in a public scandal. I'm asking you to help finish what you started when you told me about that window. You involved yourself the moment you gave me the tools to break into that room. Silence stretched between them, broken only by the crackle of the fire. The Duke studied her with an expression she couldn't read. Calculation, maybe, or regret. Possibly both. If I do this, he said finally, there's no going back. My reputation will absorb the scandal. I'm too wealthy and too titled for society to completely exile me, but yours will be ruined beyond repair. You understand that? I understand that my sister's life is worth more than my reputation. Noble sentiment. You'll hate yourself for it in 6 months when you're living in exile and eating stale bread. Maybe, but I'll still be able to look at myself in the mirror. The Duke's mouth quirked in something that might have been a smile. You're either the bravest woman I've ever met or the most foolish. Possibly both. He straightened his jacket with sharp, decisive movements. All right, I'll back your play. But we do this carefully, strategically. If we're going to destroy a peer in his own ballroom, we need to make sure the destruction is thorough enough that he can't recover. What do you have in mind? Follow my lead. And Miss Whitford? The Duke's expression hardened. Once we start this, there's no stopping, no backing down, no mercy. Are you prepared for that? Alara thought of Cecilia's tears, of all the other girls mentioned in those letters, used and discarded like broken toys, of a lifetime spent invisible and powerless while men like Blackwood played their cruel games with impunity. I'm prepared, she said. The Duke nodded once, sharp and final. Then let's go make history. Or at least a very memorable scandal. Quotes. They returned to the ballroom separately, the Duke first, Alara following 5 minutes later. The party had reached that fevered peak that came late in the evening when champagne had loosened tongues and propriety had begun its slow dissolution. The orchestra played something wild and fast. Laughter came too loud, too bright. Alara found her family clustered near the refreshment table. Her mother looked 10 years older than she had an hour ago. Thomas was pale and tight-lipped. Cecilia kept her eyes downcast, her earlier confidence shattered by revelation and betrayal. What did the Duke want? Constance demanded in a harsh whisper. To warn me. Blackwood knows the letters are missing. He's looking for whoever took them. Thomas cursed under his breath. We need to leave. Now, before he... Before he what? We can't outrun this, Thomas. And leaving now would just make us look guilty. Alara gripped her brother's arm. I'm going to end this. Tonight. But I need you all to trust me. Can you do that? Alara, what are you planning? Her mother's eyes went wide with panic. Whatever it is, don't, please. We can still salvage this if we're quiet. Quiet is what got us here. Quiet is what lets men like Blackwood destroy women without consequence. Alara pulled out the letters, held them up for her family to see. I have the proof. I have a Duke willing to back my testimony, and I have nothing left to lose except a life I never wanted anyway. So I'm going to make some noise, Mother. I'm going to make so much noise that everyone hears it. You'll be ruined, Constance whispered. I know, but Cecilia won't be. And maybe some other girl somewhere will be spared because tonight one man's cruelty got exposed. Alara looked at each of them in turn. I need you to support me when I do this, even if you don't understand, even if you're terrified. Can you do that? Cecilia lifted her head, her eyes red but determined. Yes. Thomas nodded. Whatever you need. Their mother said nothing, but she didn't protest again. That was the best Alara could hope for. She took a deep breath, smoothed her ruined dress, and walked toward the center of the ballroom where Lord Blackwood held court among his friends. The Duke of Ashenmore was already there, positioned like a chess piece waiting for the game to begin. Alara's heart hammered so hard she thought it might break through her ribs. Every instinct screamed at her to turn back, to run, to choose safety over justice. But she'd spent 24 years being safe, being invisible, being powerless. Not anymore. She stopped directly in front of Lord Blackwood. The conversation around him died as people noticed her presence. Plain, unremarkable Alara Whitford, standing where she didn't belong with an expression that promised trouble. Lord Blackwood, she said clearly, loudly enough that nearby conversations faltered. I need to speak with you, now, publicly. Blackwood's charm slipped just enough to show the predator beneath. Miss Whitford, how unexpected. I'm afraid I'm rather occupied at the moment. This won't wait. Alara pulled out the letters, held them high enough that people could see. You see, I've discovered something interesting about your intentions toward my sister. Something that I think everyone should hear. The color drained from Blackwood's face. Around them, curious guests were turning, drawn by the spectacle of confrontation. Nothing attracted society's attention quite like the promise of scandal. You're hysterical, Blackwood said, his voice tight. Perhaps you should sit down before you embarrass yourself. I'm not hysterical. I'm informed. There's a difference. Alara's hands shook, but her voice stayed steady. You made a wager, Lord Blackwood. £5,000 that you could ruin my sister before the season ends. Court her, compromise her, destroy her marriage prospects, then abandon her with maximum humiliation. It's all detailed here in your correspondence with Lord Matthews, along with several other wagers involving other innocent women. The ballroom went very, very quiet. Even the orchestra trailed off, musicians sensing drama more lucrative than their performance. Blackwood laughed, but it sounded forced. That's absurd. The ravings of a jealous woman who can't stand to see her sister happy. I have no idea where you acquired these supposed letters, but I assure everyone they're forgeries designed to— They're not forgeries. The Duke of Ashenmore's voice cut through the room like a blade. Every head turned toward him. He moved to stand beside Alara, his presence lending her credibility just by proximity. I've seen the letters. I've verified the handwriting. And I can personally attest that such wagers are disturbingly common among certain circles of bored aristocrats. Your Grace, Blackwood's charm was crumbling now, desperation showing through the cracks. Surely you can't believe this madness. This woman is obviously disturbed. This woman is remarkably sane and remarkably brave. The Duke took one of the letters from Alara, held it up for the assembled crowd to see. Lord Matthews, I believe your handwriting is distinctive enough that most here will recognize it. Would you care to deny you wrote this? Lord Matthews, standing near the back of the crowd, went chalk white. He said nothing, which was answer enough. This is preposterous. Blackwood tried to laugh again, but it came out strangled. Even if such letters exist, which I don't concede, how did she obtain them? Did she break into my private rooms, steal my correspondence? That's a crime, Your Grace. You're backing a common thief. I'm backing a woman who did what was necessary to protect her sister from a predator. The Duke's voice dropped, went cold and deadly. And if you want to press charges against her for theft, Lord Blackwood, please do. I'm certain the magistrate will be fascinated to see exactly what she stole and why. Public trials are such illuminating affairs. The threat hung in the air, crystal clear. Take this to court, and everything becomes a matter of public record. The letters, the wagers, the whole sordid conspiracy exposed in excruciating legal detail. Blackwood was trapped, and he knew it. The letters are real, aren't they? A woman's voice, Lady Margaret Ashworth, pushing through the crowd with the determination of a general leading a charge. I've heard whispers of such wagers for years, women ruined for sport while society looks away because the men involved are too wealthy, too connected, too protected. She stopped beside Alara, forming a wall of support. Well, I'm not looking away anymore, and I don't think I'm alone. Other women stepped forward. Not many. This was still a risk, still social death to openly oppose a peer. But enough. A countess, 2 viscountesses, a handful of wealthy merchants' wives whose money gave them freedom that titled ladies lacked. We believe her, Lady Margaret said simply, and we want those letters made public, all of them, every name, every wager, every woman these men planned to destroy. The room erupted into chaos, men shouting denials, women demanding answers, the hosts trying desperately to restore order while realizing their glittering party had just become the scandal of the decade. And through it all, Blackwood stood frozen, watching his carefully constructed world collapse. Then his eyes found Alara's, and the look in them made her blood run cold. Pure hatred, pure promise of retribution. "You'll regret this," he said, pitched low enough that only those immediately around him could hear. "You think you've won? You've just declared war on men who have spent generations learning how to destroy women like you. Enjoy your moment of victory, Miss Whitford. It's the last pleasant moment you'll ever have." "Perhaps." Alara met his gaze without flinching. "But at least I'll have the satisfaction of knowing I fought back. Can you say the same? Or will you spend the rest of your life being the man who got caught?" Blackwood's face twisted with rage. For a moment, Alara thought he might actually strike her. Propriety be damned. His hand came up, fisted, trembling with barely controlled violence. The Duke caught his wrist. "I wouldn't," Sebron Vale said softly, but with an edge that could cut diamonds. "You've already lost, Blackwood. Don't make it worse by adding assault to your list of crimes." "This isn't over." "Yes, it is. You're done. Finished. By tomorrow morning, every drawing room in London will be talking about this. Your friends will abandon you to save themselves. Your family will disown you to protect their name. And you'll be exactly what you deserve to be, powerless." The Duke released Blackwood's wrist with a look of disgust. "I suggest you leave while you still can, before someone decides to do something more permanent about your presence." Blackwood looked around at the crowd, at the faces that had been friendly an hour ago, now cold with judgment or calculation. The social mathematics were already happening. Supporting him meant contamination. Abandoning him meant survival. He'd taught society that lesson himself over years of casual cruelty. Now it was being applied to him. Without another word, Lord Nathaniel Blackwood turned and walked out of the ballroom. His footsteps echoed in the sudden silence. No one followed him. No one called him back. He was already a ghost. Bob. The aftermath hit like a wave. Questions shouted from all directions. Demands to see the other letters. Men trying to claim the whole thing was exaggerated. Women demanding accountability. The hosts, Lord and Lady Thornfield, looked like they wanted to die from embarrassment. Alara stood at the center of it all, numb with shock and adrenaline. She'd done it. She'd actually done it. Exposed a peer, destroyed his reputation, possibly saved her sister, and ruined herself in the process. "Come with me." The Duke's hand closed around her elbow, firm but not rough. "Before this mob tears you apart for entertainment." He guided her through the crowd with the authority of someone who expected obedience and always received it. People parted before them like water. Alara caught glimpses of faces, some sympathetic, some scandalized, some hungry for more drama. Her family followed. Cecilia sobbing with relief, Thomas grim-faced, her mother still in shock. They ended up in the same study where Alara and the Duke had met earlier. The door closed against the chaos outside. "You did it," Cecilia said, throwing her arms around Alara. "You saved me. You actually saved me." "At what cost?" Constance sank into a chair, her face gray. "Alara, what have you done? Our name will be forever associated with scandal. No one will receive us. Every door in society will close. We'll be pariahs." "We were already dying, Mother. At least this way we die fighting." Alara pulled away from Cecilia, suddenly exhausted. "Blackwood was going to destroy us anyway. At least now other women are warned. At least some good came from it." "Good?" Constance laughed bitterly. You call this good? I call it justice, the Duke said quietly. Imperfect, messy, costly, but justice nonetheless. Miss Whitford did what society should have done years ago. She held a predator accountable. And now she's ruined. We're all ruined. Ruined is subjective. The Duke moved to the sideboard, poured drinks with practiced efficiency. He handed one to Constance, who took it with shaking hands. Your circumstances have certainly changed, but whether that means destruction or opportunity depends entirely on what you do next. What can we possibly do? Thomas demanded. Ilara just branded herself a thief who breaks into men's rooms. No one will employ her. No one will marry her. She's free, Ilara said. The word surprised her, but once spoken, she realized it was true. I'm free. I have nothing left to lose, no reputation to protect, no social standing to maintain. I'm completely, terrifyingly free. The Duke studied her with an expression she couldn't read. An interesting perspective. It's the only one that makes sense. I can't go back to being invisible. That option died the moment I spoke up in that ballroom. Ilara accepted a glass from the Duke, drained it despite not knowing what it was. The liquor burned going down, sharp and clarifying. So I might as well move forward into whatever comes next. What comes next is likely to be unpleasant, the Duke warned. Blackwood wasn't lying when he said he has powerful friends. They'll retaliate. Quietly, carefully, but thoroughly. Your family's remaining credit will be destroyed. Your brother will be blackballed from his clubs. Your mother will find every door closed against her. Then we'll find new doors, Ilara said, more bravely than she felt. Or we'll build our own. Constance made a sound between a laugh and a sob. Such optimism, such blindness. Ilara, we're not pioneers, we're gentry with no money, no prospects, and now no allies. We'll be lucky if we don't end up in debtor's prison. You won't. The Duke set down his glass with careful precision. I'll see to that. The room went silent. Everyone stared at him. Why would you do that? Constance asked suspiciously. What do you gain from associating yourself with our disaster? Perhaps I'm tired of watching good people be destroyed by bad ones. The Duke's expression revealed nothing. Or perhaps I simply find Miss Whitford's courage refreshing in a society drowning in cowardice. My motivations are my own, but I have resources, influence, and a marked disinterest in society's approval. I can help, if you'll accept it. Help how? Thomas leaned forward, hope and suspicion warring in his eyes. Immediate financial relief to prevent debtor's prison. Social cover for your family. Anyone who cuts you off will find themselves suddenly unwelcome in certain circles. And for Miss Whitford specifically, the Duke turned that intense gaze on Ilara. An opportunity, if she's brave enough to take it. What kind of opportunity? Ilara's pulse quickened. Come work for me, at my estate in Ashenmore. I need someone with your particular talents, someone unafraid of powerful men, capable of gathering information, willing to fight battles others won't touch. Someone who can move through society, gathering intelligence precisely because society no longer considers you threatening. You want me to be a spy. I want you to be useful. The specifics are negotiable. The Duke's mouth curved slightly. Think about it, Miss Whitford. You've already burned every bridge back to your old life. Why not build something new? Ilara's mind raced. It was insane. Working for a Duke with a cold reputation and mysterious motives, leaving behind everything she'd known, entering a world she didn't understand. But what was the alternative? Sitting in her mother's parlor, watching their world shrink around them, living on charity and regret? I'll do it, she said. Ilara, her mother started. I'll do it, Ilara repeated more firmly. On one condition, you protect my family, all of them. Make sure Thomas can find work that doesn't depend on his social connections. Make sure Mother and Cecilia are provided for. If I'm going to sell my services, I want to know the price is worth paying. Done, the Duke extended his hand. We leave for Ashenmore tomorrow. Pack light. Where we're going, society's rules don't apply. Ilara took his hand. His grip was firm, cool, and somehow steadying, like shaking hands with winter itself. Tomorrow, she agreed. The journey to Ashenmore took 3 days by carriage. each mile carrying Alara further from the life she'd known and deeper into uncertainty. The Duke traveled in the same carriage, mostly silent, working through correspondence and occasionally pointing out landmarks with the detached interest of someone who found scenery less fascinating than other people did. "That's the border of my estate," he said on the afternoon of the third day, gesturing toward a stone marker half hidden by overgrowth. "Everything beyond this point is mine, has been for 8 generations." Alara looked out the window at the landscape rolling past. It was beautiful in a wild, untamed way. Hills covered in heather, forests dark with ancient trees, streams cutting through valleys like silver threads. But it was also harsh, isolated, the kind of place where civilization felt like a rumor rather than a reality. "It's very—" She searched for a diplomatic word. "Remote. That's why I prefer it. The Duke returned to his papers. "London is suffocating. Too many people playing too many games with too little at stake. Here, at least the brutality is honest. You make it sound like a war zone." "All life is a war zone, Miss Whitford. The only question is whether you fight or surrender." The carriage crested a hill and Ashenmore Manor came into view. It was magnificent and terrible in equal measure. A sprawling stone fortress more than a house, all sharp angles and defensive architecture. Towers rose against the gray sky like accusations. Windows stared out like empty eyes. The whole structure radiated a kind of grim endurance. This was a building that had survived centuries and intended to survive centuries more, regardless of who lived or died within its walls. "Welcome to Ashenmore," the Duke said. "Try not to get lost. The previous housekeeper did, and we didn't find her for 3 days." Alara couldn't tell if he was joking. The staff who greeted them were few and efficient, no grand reception, no ceremony. Just a butler who looked older than the estate itself, a housekeeper with suspicious eyes, and a handful of servants who moved like ghosts through the corridors. "Your rooms are in the East Wing," the Duke said, leading Alara through hallways that seemed to stretch forever. "You'll have privacy there, freedom to come and go as you please. But Miss Whitford?" He stopped at a heavy wooden door. "The North Tower is off limits. No exceptions, no explanations. Simply, don't go there." "Why not?" "Because I'm telling you not to." "Is that insufficient?" "It's maddeningly vague." "Then be maddened, but stay out of the North Tower." He opened the door to reveal a suite of rooms that were surprisingly comfortable. A bedroom, a sitting room, windows overlooking the wild gardens below. "Settle in. We'll discuss your duties tomorrow. For tonight, rest. You've earned it." He left before Alara could ask any of the 1,000 questions crowding her mind. She explored her new quarters with careful attention. The furniture was expensive but worn, suggesting generations of use. The books on the shelves were eclectic, poetry next to agricultural treatises, philosophy beside Gothic novels. The whole space felt like someone had furnished it and then forgotten about it for a decade. Alara unpacked her meager belongings. She'd taken the Duke's advice and packed light, leaving behind dresses and accessories that belonged to a life she'd never returned to. Now she owned 3 practical gowns, sturdy boots, and the letters she'd stolen from Blackwood. Insurance and evidence kept close. Night fell fast in Ashenmore. Alara watched from her window as shadows swallowed the landscape, turning the wild beauty into something darker, more primal. She could hear the wind howling around the towers, could feel the age of the stones pressing down. This was her life now. This isolated fortress, this cold Duke, this mysterious purpose he'd hired her for. And somewhere in the back of her mind, a voice whispered, "What have you gotten yourself into?" A knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. Alara opened it to find a maid, young, nervous, holding a tray with dinner. "His Grace thought you might prefer eating in your rooms tonight," the girl said, setting down the tray, "rather than dining in the hall." "That's considerate of him." Alara studied the maid, who wouldn't meet her eyes. "What's your name?" "Mary, miss." "How long have you worked here, Mary?" 3 years, miss." "And the Duke?" "What's he like as an employer?" Mary's hands twisted in her apron. "He's fair, miss. Pays well, doesn't interfere much, keeps to himself mostly." But nothing, miss." Mary's voice went carefully neutral. "Will there be anything else?" "The North Tower. Why is it forbidden?" Mary went white. I can't. That is, it's not my place to. Miss, please don't ask questions about the North Tower, for your own sake. She fled before Alara could press further. Alara ate her dinner slowly, turning over everything she'd learned and everything she hadn't. The Duke of Ashenmore was a man of secrets, that much was obvious. But what kind of secrets required a forbidden tower and terrified servants? She should probably heed the warning, should stay away from whatever mystery lurked in the North Wing. But Alara had spent 24 years being obedient, being careful, staying within boundaries others set for her. And where had it gotten her? To the edge of ruin and the precipice of desperation. She'd climbed down a trellis and stolen evidence from a lord's room. She'd confronted a predator in a public ballroom and destroyed his reputation. She'd burned every bridge to her old life and accepted employment from a mysterious duke with a dark reputation. What was one more boundary crossed? Alara finished her dinner, changed into her nightgown, and climbed into bed. But sleep eluded her. The howling wind sounded like voices. The creaking stones sounded like footsteps. And somewhere in this vast, cold fortress, a secret waited in a tower she'd been forbidden to approach. At midnight, unable to bear the curiosity any longer, Alara rose and lit a candle. She pulled a shawl over her nightgown and slipped into the hallway. The manor at night was a different creature than by day. Shadows moved in ways that had nothing to do with her candlelight. The air felt thick, expectant, as if the house itself were holding its breath. Alara navigated by instinct and logic. The North Tower would be, naturally, in the northern section of the manor. She followed corridors that grew progressively colder, older, more neglected. The expensive furnishings gave way to bare stone. The portraits on the walls became older, stranger, faces from generations past staring down with expressions that suggested they knew something she didn't. She found the tower entrance behind a locked door. Of course it was locked. Why would it be easy? But the lock was old, simple, the kind that yielded to a hairpin and determination. Alara had learned a lot about locks over the past few days. She worked the mechanism with shaking hands until she heard the satisfying click of surrender. The door swung open on hinges that shrieked like dying animals. Beyond lay a spiral staircase climbing up into darkness. Alara raised her candle and began to climb. The stairs seemed to go on forever, twisting up and up until she lost track of how high she'd gone. Her calves burned, her breath came short, but she kept climbing, driven by curiosity and stubbornness, and the bone-deep certainty that whatever waited at the top of this tower would explain everything. Finally, the stairs ended at another door. This one wasn't locked. Alara pushed it open and stepped into the tower room. It was beautiful and heartbreaking in equal measure. A circular chamber with windows on all sides, offering views of the wild landscape stretching to the horizon. But the room itself was a prison. Bars on the inside of the windows, chains mounted to the walls, furniture that had been bolted down as if to prevent it from being used as a weapon. And in the center of the room, staring at her with eyes that held equal parts fury and desperation, stood a woman. She was perhaps 30, with dark hair gone wild, and a face that might have been beautiful before whatever had happened to put her here. She wore a nightgown similar to Alara's, but torn and stained. Her feet were bare. And around her wrist, a length of chain just long enough to allow movement within the room, but not escape. "Who are you?" the woman demanded, her voice hoarse from disuse. Alara's throat closed. She couldn't speak, couldn't process what she was seeing. The Duke of Ashenmore kept a woman chained in his tower. The Duke was a monster. And Alara had just placed herself completely in his power, miles from civilization, with no allies and no escape. The woman laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "Oh, you poor fool. You're his new plaything, aren't you? Well, welcome to hell. I'm Isabel. I've been here for 7 years." The candle fell from Alara's numb fingers. In the sudden darkness, lit only by moonlight through the barred windows, she heard footsteps on the stairs behind her. Heavy, male, inevitable. The Duke had followed her, and she'd just revealed that she couldn't follow the simplest instruction: stay out of the Forbidden Tower. "Miss Whitford?" came his voice, cold as winter death. How predictable, and how very, very disappointing. Alara's mind went blank with terror. Every survival instinct screamed at her to run, but there was nowhere to go. The Duke blocked the only exit, and behind her stood a woman who'd been imprisoned for 7 years. 7 years. The number echoed in her skull like a death knell. I can explain, Alara said, her voice barely above a whisper. Can you? The Duke stepped into the tower room, and in the moonlight his face looked carved from ice. I'm fascinated to hear how you explain directly disobeying the one absolute rule I gave you, the single boundary I asked you to respect. I needed to understand. You needed to obey. His voice cut like a blade. I offered you sanctuary, employment, protection for your family, and within 24 hours you've proven you can't follow basic instructions. Basic instructions that involve a woman chained in a tower? Alara's fear transmuted into fury. What did you expect me to do? Ignore the fact that you're keeping a prisoner? Pretend I didn't notice the forbidden room that everyone's terrified of? Yes, the Duke said flatly. That's exactly what I expected. The same thing I expect from every servant in this house: discretion, obedience, and the good sense not to interfere in matters they don't understand. Then help me understand. Alara planted her feet, refusing to back down, even though every rational part of her brain screamed that she was arguing with a man who apparently imprisoned women for sport. Who is she? Why is she here? Why in hell do you have her chained like an animal? The woman, Isabel, laughed again, that terrible broken glass sound. Oh, let me tell you, girl, I'm his wife, or I was before he decided I was too inconvenient to keep around. So he locked me up here and told everyone I died. Tragic illness, apparently. The whole county came to my funeral. I heard the bells ringing from this very tower. The words hit Alara like physical blows. Wife, dead, funeral, imprisonment. The Duke's face remained expressionless, but something flickered in his eyes. Pain, maybe, or rage, or some combination of both. Is that true? Alara demanded. Did you fake your wife's death and lock her in a tower? No, the Duke said. He's lying! Isabel surged forward, the chain snapping taut. I'm Isabel Vale, Duchess of Ashenmore. I married him 8 years ago, gave him 3 years of my life, and when I tried to leave, when I finally found the courage to escape his cold, heartless cruelty, he brought me here, locked me away where no one could hear me scream. That's not what happened, the Duke said, his voice still maddeningly calm. Then tell me what did happen. Alara's hands fisted in her nightgown. Because right now, all I see is a woman in chains and a man with every reason to lie about it. The Duke stared at her for a long moment, something unreadable moving behind those winter storm eyes. Then abruptly, he turned and walked to one of the barred windows. Her name is Isabel Vale, he said quietly, and she is my wife. That much is true. What she's not telling you is why she's here, why the chains are necessary, why I couldn't let her leave. Because you're a monster, Isabel spat. Because you couldn't stand that I wanted my freedom. Because you poisoned 3 servants trying to escape. The Duke's words fell like stones into still water. Because you set fire to the East Wing with people sleeping in it. Because the last time I gave you freedom of movement, you attempted to murder my sister with a fireplace poker. Silence crashed into the room. Alara looked between them, trying to reconcile the two narratives. A captive wife, desperate for freedom, a dangerous woman who'd hurt innocent people. Both stories couldn't be true, or could they? You're lying, Isabel said, but her voice had lost some of its conviction. You always lie. I never lie. I simply don't explain myself to people who won't listen. The Duke turned back to face them both. Isabel suffers from a condition, a sickness of the mind that makes her violent, unpredictable, dangerous to herself and others. I've brought in doctors, specialists. No one can cure her. The best they can do is recommend isolation and restraint. So you made her your prisoner, Alara said. I made her safe, from herself and from the consequences of her actions. The Duke's jaw tightened. Would you prefer I had her committed to Bedlam, chained to a wall with hundreds of other suffering souls, displayed for entertainment? Or perhaps I should have let her burn down the house with everyone in it. Tell me, Miss Whitford, what's the moral choice when someone you love becomes a danger? Alara had no answer. The question was too complicated, too painful, too real. He's trying to make you sympathize with him, Isabel said, desperation creeping into her voice. Don't believe his lies. I'm not sick. I'm angry. There's a difference. I'm angry that he took my life, my freedom, my future. You took your own future when you hurt innocent people. The Duke's voice remained level, but Alara could hear the pain beneath it now, the years of carrying this impossible burden. I loved you, Isabel. I tried everything, but I will not let you destroy others because your mind is broken. My mind is not broken. My circumstances are broken. You're broken. Isabel lunged forward again, the chain snapping her back. You're the monster, Sabrin. You always were, cold and heartless and incapable of feeling anything. Enough! The Duke's voice cracked like a whip. Miss Whitford, you have a choice. You can leave tonight. I'll have a carriage prepared, money for your family, and you never have to think about this place again. Or you can stay. Accept that there are situations in this world that have no good solutions, and help me manage an impossible situation with as much humanity as possible. Which will it be? Alara's mind raced. Every instinct told her to run, to get as far from this gothic nightmare as possible. This wasn't what she'd signed up for. She'd expected espionage, maybe, or political maneuvering. Not this. Not a woman in chains, a duke drowning in impossible choices and moral questions that had no right answers. But she thought of her sister, safe because Alara had been brave enough to break rules. She thought of the other girls mentioned in those letters, spared because she'd chosen action over silence. She thought of a lifetime spent invisible and powerless, and the few days she'd spent being neither. And she thought of the Duke's face when he'd talked about his wife, the pain he tried to hide, the love that had curdled into duty, the man who'd chosen to be called a monster rather than abandon someone who couldn't be saved. I need to know something first, Alara said. The truth. All of it. Not the version you tell to make yourself feel better, but the real truth. Can you give me that? The Duke studied her for a long moment. Then, slowly, he nodded. Come with me. If you're going to judge, you should have all the evidence. He led her down the spiral stairs, leaving Isabel screaming curses behind them. The woman's voice followed them through the corridors, growing fainter but no less anguished. Alara's heart twisted with every echo. The Duke took her to his study, a room she hadn't seen before, lined with books and documents and the accumulated evidence of a man who tried to solve problems through pure force of intellect. He unlocked a cabinet and pulled out a thick leather portfolio. Medical records, he said, spreading papers across his desk. From 7 different doctors, 3 of them the finest alienists in England. All agree. Isabel suffers from a form of mania that makes her violent without warning. The episodes come and go. In between, she's lucid, charming, everything you'd expect from a duchess. But when the darkness takes her... He trailed off, his hand hovering over a particular document. Alara read the reports. They painted a devastating picture. A woman who'd attacked servants without provocation, who'd set fires and claimed not to remember, who'd tried to kill the Duke's younger sister, a girl of 16, because she'd imagined the girl was trying to steal her position. Why not commit her to an asylum? Alara asked. It would be legal, accepted. Have you ever been to an asylum, Miss Whitford? I have. I've toured them all, looking for somewhere humane enough to consider. His voice went hollow. They're houses of horror, patients chained naked to walls, beaten for displaying symptoms, exhibited for entertainment. I couldn't do that to her. Whatever she's become, she was once the woman I loved. She deserves better than that hell. So you made her a different hell. I made her as comfortable as I could given the circumstances. The Duke gestured toward the papers. She has good food, clean clothes, medical care, books, art supplies, anything that might occupy her mind safely. The chain is long enough that she can move freely within the room. The bars are to keep her from the windows. She's tried to jump twice. Alara sat down heavily, her legs suddenly unable to support her weight. This wasn't simple. This wasn't the clear-cut villainy she'd expected to find. This was tragedy wearing the costume of cruelty, impossible choices dressed up as imprisonment. Why hire me? She asked. Why bring me here knowing I might discover this? Because I'm tired, the Duke said simply. Tired of carrying this alone. Tired of being seen as a monster because I refuse to abandon someone everyone else has given up on. Tired of managing an estate, a fortune, and a mentally ill wife with no help because anyone who learns the truth either runs or tries to use it against me. He met her eyes. You broke into a lord's room and stole evidence to save your sister. You confronted a predator publicly rather than stay silent. You chose justice over safety. I thought, Perhaps you might understand that sometimes there are no good choices, only less terrible ones. You thought I'd sympathize with keeping a woman in chains. I thought you'd understand that love doesn't stop just because it becomes inconvenient, that duty matters even when it costs everything, that sometimes protecting people means making choices that look cruel from the outside. The Duke's mask slipped, showing the exhaustion beneath. I thought you might be brave enough to help me find a better solution than the one I've cobbled together alone. Alara stood and walked to the window, staring out at the dark landscape. The wild beauty of Ashenmoor suddenly made sense. This was a place for people who didn't fit anywhere else, for problems that couldn't be solved in civilization's neat parlors and judged drawing rooms. What would helping look like? She asked. Stay with her, talk to her. She has lucid periods between the episodes, sometimes days, even weeks of perfect clarity. During those times, she's desperately lonely, hungry for conversation that isn't doctors' questions or servants' fear. The Duke moved to stand beside her, not touching, but close enough that she could feel his presence. Read to her, play chess, let her feel human instead of monstrous. And when the darkness comes, because it will come, help me keep her safe without resorting to the brutality that asylums use. You're asking me to befriend your imprisoned wife. I'm asking you to show mercy to someone the world has decided doesn't deserve it. He paused. I'll pay you, of course. Triple the salary we discussed. Your family will want for nothing. I don't care about the money. Alara surprised herself with the truth of it. I care about whether this is justice or just elaborate cruelty dressed up as duty. Then decide, the Duke's voice softened. You're brave enough to break rules when they're wrong. Be brave enough to stay when the right choice isn't clear. Alara turned to face him fully. In the lamplight, he looked older than his years, a man carrying weights that would have crushed lesser people, but he was still carrying them, still trying, still searching for better answers than the ones he'd found. I'll stay, she said, on 3 conditions. Name them. First, I get to speak with your sister, verify your story about the attack. If you're lying, I leave and I take Isabel with me even if I have to break her out myself. Agreed. Margaret lives in the South Wing. I'll arrange an introduction tomorrow. Second, I get to consult with the doctors myself, ask my own questions, form my own opinions about Isabel's condition. The next doctor visits in 3 days. You can sit in on the full consultation. Third, Alara took a breath. If I find a better solution, a treatment, a doctor, a facility that's actually humane, you implement it, no matter what it costs, no matter how difficult. The Duke studied her face, and for the first time since she'd met him, something like hope flickered in his eyes. Agreed. If you can find something better, I'll move heaven and earth to make it happen. They shook hands, sealing the bargain. Now, Alara said, squaring her shoulders, take me back up there. If I'm going to do this, I should start now. Shatit. Isabel had exhausted herself with screaming by the time they returned to the tower. She sat hunched against the wall, her face streaked with tears, looking more broken than dangerous. You came back, she said, her voice hoarse. Why would you come back? Because running away from hard things is how we got into this mess in the first place, Alara said. She pulled a chair close, but not too close, and sat. My name is Alara Whitford, and I'm here to talk, if you'll let me. Isabel's eyes narrowed with suspicion. He sent you to spy on me, to report back about my lucidity so he knows when to drug me again. He sent me to keep you company. Whether I report anything back is between you and me. Alara folded her hands in her lap. I've read the medical reports. I know what the doctors say, but I'd like to hear your side. What do you say happened? You'll think I'm mad. Possibly, but I'll listen first before I judge. Isabel studied her with eyes that were far too sharp, far too aware. Then, slowly, she began to talk. The story that emerged was heartbreaking in its complexity. A young woman who'd married for love, only to discover her husband was emotionally distant, consumed by his duties, unable to express warmth even when he felt it. Arguments that escalated, resentment that festered. And then, during one terrible fight, something had broken in Isabel's mind, literally, chemically, catastrophically broken. I don't remember attacking the maid, Isabel said, her voice small. I remember being angry. So angry I couldn't breathe. And then, nothing, just waking up in a locked room with Severin telling me I'd hurt someone. He showed me the bruises on her throat, fingerprints that matched mine, but I couldn't remember doing it. And the fire? I remember that one. I was trying to burn the marriage documents, thought if I destroyed them, I could be free. I didn't realize the curtains would catch. Didn't think about the servants sleeping upstairs. Isabel's face crumpled. I'm not a monster, but I've done monstrous things, and I can't trust my own mind to know the difference anymore. Alara felt tears prick her eyes. This was worse than simple villainy. This was tragedy. Two people who'd loved each other, destroyed by an illness neither could control or cure. Do you still love him? She asked softly. I hate him. Isabel's voice broke. I hate him for locking me here, for seeing me at my worst and choosing duty over faith, for not believing I could get better if he just gave me a chance. She paused. And yes, I still love him, which makes the hate even worse. They talked until dawn, Alara listening while Isabel poured out years of loneliness, rage, grief, and desperate hope. Some of what she said made perfect sense. Some of it veered into paranoia and delusion. But all of it was human. Painfully, desperately human. When the sun rose, painting the tower room in shades of gold, Alara stood. I'll come back tomorrow. We can talk more. Or play chess. I saw the board. Or I can read to you, if you'd prefer. Why are you doing this? Isabel asked. What's in it for you? Maybe nothing. Maybe everything. Alara moved toward the door. But I spent my whole life being invisible and powerless. Now I have a chance to actually help someone who needs it. Even if that someone is complicated and dangerous and possibly beyond saving, at least I'll know I tried. You're either very brave or very stupid. I've heard that before. I still haven't decided which. Alara paused at the threshold. For what it's worth, Isabel, I don't think you're a monster. I think you're sick, and I think you deserve better than chains. So I'm going to try to find you better. No promises, but I'll try. Isabel's face did something complicated. Hope and skepticism and desperate longing all mixed together. Good luck. You'll need it. The Duke waited in the corridor below. He looked like he hadn't slept, which probably meant he hadn't. Well? He asked. She's complicated, Alara said. Exactly as complicated as you described, which means there might actually be a way through this. I've been trying for 7 years. You've been trying alone, and you're too close to it. You love her, which makes you both too soft and too hard at the same time. You can't see clearly. Alara started walking, forcing him to follow. I need to meet your sister. Then I need to talk to the servant she hurt. Then I need complete access to every medical text in your library and permission to write to specialists you haven't consulted yet. You've been here one night, and you're already reorganizing my life. Someone needs to. You've been drowning in this for years. Alara stopped, turned to face him. You saved me from Lord Blackwood. You gave me tools to fight back when I thought I was powerless. Let me return the favor. Let me help you find a way through this that doesn't require you to be a monster or a martyr. The Duke stared at her, something shifting in his expression. You're remarkable, do you know that? Most people would have run, or judged, or tried to use this information for leverage. Most people didn't climb down a trellis to steal evidence from a lord's room. I'm not most people. Alara smiled slightly. Besides, I told you I'm free now. Free to make choices that don't make sense to anyone but me. And I choose this. I choose to try. Even though you might fail? Especially because I might fail. Failure doing something worthwhile beats success doing nothing at all. The Duke laughed, short and surprised. Where have you been my entire life? Invisible, but I'm not anymore. Alara resumed walking. Now come on. I want to meet Margaret before breakfast. Then we're drafting letters to every alienist, doctor, and specialist in England who might have insights the others missed. Someone, somewhere, has to know something useful. They spent the morning exactly as Alara had outlined. Margaret Vale, the Duke's sister, now 23, confirmed every detail of the attack. showed Alara the scar on her arm where the fireplace poker had connected. But she also spoke of the Isabel she'd known before the illness. Kind, funny, vibrant. I don't blame her, Margaret said quietly. Whatever took hold of her mind, it wasn't her fault, but I understand why Sebren did what he did. He was trying to protect me, protect everyone, including Isabel herself. The servants confirmed similar stories, violence that came without warning, followed by remorse so profound it was almost worse, a woman at war with her own mind. Armed with confirmation and conviction, Alara threw herself into research with the same focused determination she'd brought to stealing evidence from Blackwood. She read medical texts until her eyes burned, wrote letters to specialists across England and Scotland, describing symptoms in careful detail without revealing names. Consulted with the local doctor, who admitted he was out of his depth but appreciated that someone was trying. Days became weeks, weeks became months. Alara established a routine. Mornings with Isabel during her lucid periods, afternoons with research, evenings discussing findings with the Duke. She witnessed 3 of Isabel's violent episodes and learned to recognize the warning signs. The way her eyes went distant, her speech patterns changed, her movements became erratic. It's like she goes somewhere else, Alara told the Duke after one particularly difficult episode. Like the Isabel I know retreats deep inside and something else takes control. The doctors call it mania. They say it's incurable. The doctors don't know everything. Alara spread out her correspondence, responses from specialists, suggestions for treatments, experimental therapies being tested in France and Germany. Look at this. Dr. Heinrich in Berlin has been treating similar cases with a combination of careful diet, rigorous scheduling, and small doses of lithium salts. Half his patients show marked improvement. Lithium is dangerous. Everything is dangerous when you're desperate, but controlled doses, monitored carefully, might help stabilize her moods. Alara pulled out another letter. And this one, Dr. Sarah Crawford in Edinburgh. She's had success treating violent mania with a combination of isolation reduction and purposeful activity, keeping patients engaged with meaningful work rather than just locked away to rot. The Duke leaned forward, actually reading with interest instead of skepticism. You think this could work? I think it's worth trying. What's the worst that happens? It doesn't work, and we're back where we started. But what if it does work? What if there's actually hope here? He looked at her across the desk, and in his eyes she saw something that had been absent when she'd first arrived. Actual hope. Real belief that maybe, possibly, things could be different. All right, he said. Write to both doctors. Arrange consultations. We'll try anything that doesn't risk making her worse. Thank you. Alara gathered her papers. And Sebren? She'd started using his first name somewhere around week 3, when formality began to feel ridiculous given the circumstances. You're not a monster. You're a man who made impossible choices under terrible circumstances. But you don't have to make them alone anymore. His hand found hers across the desk, warm, steady, solid. I'm beginning to believe that. Because of you. Dr. Heinrich arrived in November, bringing with him new theories and careful optimism. Dr. Crawford came in December, her practical Scottish manner a perfect complement to Heinrich's German precision. Together, they examined Isabel, reviewed histories, proposed treatments. The lithium therapy started slowly, tiny doses, carefully monitored, with Heinrich staying at the estate for 3 weeks to observe. The change wasn't immediate or dramatic, but gradually, over weeks, the episodes grew less frequent, less violent. Isabel's lucid periods stretched from days to weeks. I can think clearly again, she told Alara one winter morning, tears streaming down her face. For the first time in years, my mind feels like my own. Don't expect miracles, Dr. Crawford warned. This is management, not cure. She'll need careful monitoring for the rest of her life. But with discipline and support, she can have periods of genuine stability. The question then became, what to do with stability? I want to leave the tower, Isabel said during one of their chess games. Not the estate. I understand I can't just walk away. But this room, it's a prison even when I'm well. It makes me feel like a monster even when I'm not. Alara brought the request to Sebren. He resisted at first, fear and caution warring with hope. But eventually, with careful planning, they moved Isabel to a suite of rooms in the south wing, still monitored, still with precautions, but with windows that weren't barred and a door that locked from the outside only at night. The change was remarkable. Given purpose and dignity, Isabel began to heal in ways medicine alone couldn't accomplish. She started painting again, her canvases wild and beautiful and raw. She helped Margaret with estate correspondence. She even, carefully, began speaking with some of the servants, apologizing for past harm, trying to rebuild bridges she'd burned. It wasn't perfect. There were still bad days, still episodes that required isolation, still moments when the darkness threatened to take over, but they were manageable, survivable, human. And through it all, Alara watched as Sebron transformed from the cold, controlled Duke she'd first met into something more complex and real. He laughed at dinner, smiled at Margaret's jokes, looked at Isabel with something that might eventually, carefully, become love again instead of duty. "You did this," he told Alara one evening as they walked the grounds, the winter sunset painting everything gold. "You came into an impossible situation and somehow made it possible. I just asked questions everyone else was too polite or too frightened to ask. You refused to accept that cruelty was the only option. You fought for a solution that preserved dignity." He stopped walking, turned to face her. "You're extraordinary, Alara Whitford, and I—" He paused, something vulnerable crossing his face. "I don't know what I would have done without you. You would have continued carrying it alone, like you always have." Alara met his eyes. "But you don't have to anymore. You have help, you have hope, and you have time to figure out what comes next." "What comes next for you?" he asked. "You came here as a last resort, a woman with nowhere else to go. But you've proven yourself invaluable. You could go anywhere now, do anything." "I could," Alara agreed, "but I rather like it here. The work is meaningful. The company is interesting, and I'm not invisible anymore. I'm necessary. That's worth more than any amount of social respectability." "You're more than necessary. You're—" Sebron stopped, clearly struggling with words that didn't come naturally. "You matter. To this estate. To my family. To me." The words hung between them, weighted with implications neither was quite ready to examine. "I matter," Alara repeated softly. "I spent 24 years not mattering. Being the invisible sister, the unmarriageable daughter, the woman people looked through rather than at. And now," she smiled, "now I break into towers and reorganize Dukes' lives and find solutions to impossible problems. It's terrifying and exhausting and absolutely wonderful." "Then stay." Sebron's voice went rough. "Not as an employee, not as a temporary solution. Stay because you want to, because this place, these people, this life might be worth building something around." Alara's heart did something complicated in her chest. This wasn't a proposal, wasn't even properly a declaration, but it was an invitation to something more permanent than employment, more meaningful than refuge. "I'll stay," she said, "for as long as I'm wanted, for as long as I'm useful." "You'll always be wanted." The words came out fierce, almost angry in their intensity. "I'll make sure of that." They walked back to the house in comfortable silence, the winter cold biting but not quite reaching them. And Alara thought about how strange life was, how she'd climbed down a trellis to save her sister and ended up saving herself, how she'd broken rules and burned bridges, and somehow found a place where broken rules were necessary and burned bridges were just the start of reconstruction. Behind them, lights glowed in Isabel's windows, the woman who'd been locked in darkness, now painting by lamplight, creating beauty from the wreckage of her mind. Ahead, Ashenmore Manor rose against the darkening sky. No longer a prison, but a place where impossible people did impossible things and somehow made them work. And beside her walked a man who'd learned that strength sometimes meant asking for help, that love sometimes meant choosing hope over fear, that some battles couldn't be won alone. Alara had spent a lifetime being invisible. Now she was essential, and she had no intention of ever being invisible again. Spring came to Ashenmore with a violence that matched everything else about the place. One day the landscape was locked in winter's gray grip. The next it exploded with wildflowers and new growth, as if the earth itself had decided waiting was for cowards. Alara stood at her window watching the transformation and thought about how much had changed in 6 months and how much more was about to change. Because today, society was coming to Ashenmore, and society had no idea what it was walking into. "You don't have to do this," Sebren said from the doorway. He'd developed a habit of appearing without announcement, as if her rooms were an extension of his own territory. Alara found she didn't mind. "We could cancel. Send word that Isabel has taken ill again. No one would question it. No one would question it because everyone believes she's dead." Alara turned from the window. "That's precisely why we need to do this. The lie has gone on long enough. The lie has kept her safe. The lie has kept her buried." Alara moved to her desk, where invitations were stacked in neat piles. "You faked her death to protect her from scandal and commitment to bedlam. But she's not that person anymore. She's stable. She's functional. She deserves to exist as herself, not as a ghost haunting your estate." Sebren crossed the room, his expression torn between hope and terror. Over the past months, his walls had come down piece by careful piece, revealing a man who felt everything too deeply and had learned to show nothing at all. But with Alara, the mask slipped more often. With her, he allowed himself to be uncertain. "If we announce she's alive, there will be consequences. Questions about where she's been, why we lied. The medical details will remain private. That's not negotiable." Alara picked up the guest list they'd compiled together. "But we can tell the truth about the essentials. That she was ill, that you sought treatment privately to spare her the indignity of public scrutiny, that she's recovered enough to rejoin society in limited capacity. It's not the whole truth, but it's enough truth to matter. And if people react badly, if they call her mad, call me a liar, refuse to accept, then we've lost nothing we actually needed." Alara set down the list and took his hands. The gesture still felt new, this casual intimacy they'd developed over long evenings, discussing treatments and strategies, and slowly, carefully, other things. "Sebren, you've spent 7 years caring what society thinks while doing what was right anyway. It's exhausting. Let me show you what happens when you stop caring entirely." His mouth quirked. "You're a terrible influence." "I'm the best influence. I got you to actually try solving this instead of just enduring it." She squeezed his hands. "Trust me, one more time. I haven't been wrong yet." "You've been wrong several times. You just argue so convincingly that I forget." Semantics. Alara released him and returned to the preparations. The spring ball was her idea, a calculated risk designed to reintroduce Isabel to society on Alara's terms, rather than waiting for the truth to leak out on someone else's. Controlled revelation instead of devastating exposure. The guest list was carefully curated. People who owed Sebren favors, women Lady Margaret had cultivated as allies, families whose own scandals made them less likely to judge. And because Alara believed in facing demons head-on, a few select members of the Tun's most vicious gossip circles. Let them see Isabel healthy and sane. Let them carry that truth back to London. "Margaret thinks I'm insane," Sebren said. "Margaret thinks you're brave. There's a difference." Alara checked her reflection in the mirror. She'd chosen her dress carefully. Elegant, but not showy. Expensive, but not ostentatious. The woman who'd climbed down a trellis in last season's blue now wore silk that cost more than her family's quarterly income used to be. Sebren had insisted on the wardrobe, and Alara had learned to accept generosity without shame. "Is Isabel ready?" "As ready as she'll ever be. Dr. Crawford is with her now, making sure the evening stress doesn't trigger an episode." "It won't. We've been preparing for weeks. She knows what to expect." Alara turned from the mirror. "Have you heard from my family?" "They arrived an hour ago. Your mother is scandalized by everything. Your brother is impressed by the horses. And Cecilia is engaged in animated conversation with Margaret about fashion and freedom." Sebren's expression softened. "They're proud of you, you know. Even your mother, though she'd rather die than admit it directly." "Mother's proud I'm not a social liability anymore. It's not quite the same thing." But Alara smiled despite herself. Her family's circumstances had improved dramatically over the past months. Debts paid, social connections restored through Sebren's influence, Cecilia actually courted by decent men who weren't making wagers. Thomas had found employment managing an estate for one of Sebren's associates. They weren't wealthy, but they were stable, safe, and they knew exactly who to thank for it. The real test would be tonight. Watching Alara navigate this world not as an employee or charity case, but as something else entirely, something society didn't have a neat category for. Guests are beginning to arrive, Sebron said, checking his pocket watch. We should go down. Together? Alara took his offered arm. Together. The ballroom at Ashenmoor had been transformed. What was usually a cold, echoing space now glowed with hundreds of candles draped in spring flowers, alive with the promise of carefully managed scandal. Guests arrived in waves, their curiosity barely masked by politeness. The Duke of Ashenmoor rarely entertained. When he did, it was worth attending. Alara stood beside Sebron at the receiving line, acutely aware of the whispers. Everyone knew who she was, the woman who'd exposed Lord Blackwood, ruined her own reputation, and then vanished into the wilds of northern England. Seeing her here, at the Duke's side, wearing clothes that screamed wealth and standing with the confidence of someone who belonged, it created questions no one was quite bold enough to ask directly. "Miss Whitford," Lord Pemberton said when his turn came, his tone carefully neutral. "How unexpected to see you here." "Is it?" Alara smiled pleasantly. "I've been in residence at Ashenmoor for 6 months. I would think the scandal sheets had exhausted the topic by now. The sheets say many things. Few of them agree on the details. How tedious for them. Reality so rarely cooperates with narrative." Alara's smile never wavered. Lady Pemberton, she who'd sneered about the Whitford family's failing fortunes, looked like she'd swallowed a lemon. "Do enjoy the ball, Lady Pemberton. I've heard the champagne is exceptional." They moved on, replaced by the next curious guests. Beside her, Sebron radiated grim amusement. "You're enjoying this?" "Immensely. These are the same people who watched my family drown and did nothing. Watching them scramble to recalibrate their judgment is deeply satisfying." Vindictive woman. "I prefer woman with excellent memory." Alara's attention caught on a new arrival, and her smile sharpened. "Speaking of memory, look who just arrived." Lord Blackwood stood in the entrance, his expression caught between shock and fury. He'd aged badly in 6 months. The scandal had clung to him despite his attempts to bury it. His reputation tarnished enough that invitations had dried up. But Sebron had sent him one anyway, because Alara had insisted. "You invited him," Blackwood said flatly when he reached them, dispensing with any pretense of civility. "Why?" "Because you need to see something," Alara said calmly. "Call it a lesson in consequences, or perhaps an object demonstration of how women you tried to destroy can rebuild themselves while you're still drowning in the wreckage of your own cruelty. Either interpretation works." "You ruined my life." "No, Lord Blackwood, you ruined your own life by documenting your crimes in writing. I simply made sure everyone knew about it." Alara's voice carried just enough to reach nearby guests, who were absolutely listening. "If you'd like to discuss it further, I'm happy to provide additional evidence. I kept copies of all those letters, including the ones about the other women." Blackwood's face went purple. For a moment, Alara thought he might cause a scene, which would be perfect, actually. Nothing would cement her position quite like Blackwood losing control while she remained serene. But Sebron spoke first, his voice carrying the weight of ducal authority. "You were invited as a courtesy, Blackwood. An opportunity to demonstrate you've learned from your mistakes. I suggest you take advantage of it by being civil, or take your leave before I have you removed. Your choice." The room had gone quiet. Everyone watching, everyone waiting. Blackwood looked between them, the woman who'd destroyed him and the Duke who'd backed her play. The social mathematics were obvious. He was outmatched, outmaneuvered, and dangerously close to making everything worse. "My congratulations on your connection," he said, each word costing him. "I wish you both every happiness you deserve." He moved away quickly, disappearing into the crowd. Conversations resumed. The moment passed. "That went better than expected," Sebron murmured. "He's a coward. Cowards always choose survival over satisfaction." Alara watched Blackwood flee toward the card room. But the point is made. Everyone saw him back down. Everyone saw us united. That matters more than any cutting remark I could have delivered. You're frighteningly good at this. I had excellent teachers. You showed me how power works. Lady Margaret taught me how society's games are played, and 6 months managing Isabel's care taught me that sometimes the kindest thing you can do is refuse to let people hide from truth. Alara straightened as the receiving line finally ended. Speaking of truth, it's time. Sebren's hand tightened on hers. Are you certain? Absolutely not. But we're doing it anyway. Alara signaled to Margaret, who'd been waiting near the orchestra. The music wound down. Margaret stepped forward, every inch the confident aristocrat she'd become. Ladies and gentlemen, Margaret's voice carried across the ballroom. Thank you for joining us this evening. Before the dancing begins, my brother has an announcement. Sebren stepped forward, and the room's attention focused on him with an intensity that would have crushed lesser men. But he'd been born to this, trained for it, and he'd learned from Alara that sometimes vulnerability was stronger than armor. 7 years ago, he began, his voice steady and clear, I made a difficult decision. My wife, Isabel, fell gravely ill, a sickness of the mind that made her a danger to herself and others. Rather than commit her to an asylum, where treatment is often worse than the disease, I chose to care for her privately, to protect her dignity and give her the best chance at recovery. The whispers started immediately. Alara heard the words being hissed, dead, funeral, deception, scandal. Sebren continued as if he hadn't heard. To spare her the intrusion of public scrutiny during her most vulnerable time, I allowed society to believe she had died. It was a lie born of love and desperation, and I do not apologize for it. But my wife has made remarkable progress under the care of pioneering doctors. She is not cured, such illnesses rarely are, but she is well enough to exist as herself again, and she should not have to remain dead to do so. He paused, meeting the eyes of various guests with that direct, unflinching gaze that dared them to judge. Therefore, I would like to reintroduce you all to Isabel Vale, Duchess of Ashenmore. The ballroom doors opened. Isabel entered on Dr. Crawford's arm, and the room collectively held its breath. She looked beautiful and fragile and absolutely real. Her dress was simple elegance, her hair styled conservatively, her bearing that of someone who knew she was walking into judgment and chose to do it anyway. She'd been terrified this morning, nearly backed out twice. But Alara had reminded her of something important. She had nothing left to lose, which meant she had everything to gain. Isabel and Dr. Crawford crossed the ballroom floor in silence so profound that every footstep echoed. The guests parted before them, some from shock, some from calculation, some from genuine compassion. When they reached Sebren, Isabel curtsied with shaking grace. Your Grace, she said formally. Thank you for inviting me back into the world. Isabel. Sebren took her hand, raised it to his lips in a gesture that was both intimate and ceremonial. Welcome home. Then he did something that made the entire ballroom gasp. He turned to Alara and held out his other hand. And I would like to thank Miss Alara Whitford, who made this possible, who refused to accept that cruelty was the only option, who fought for solutions when everyone else, including myself, had given up hope. Alara took his hand, stepped forward into the center of attention she'd spent a lifetime avoiding. But this time, being seen didn't feel like exposure. It felt like recognition, like earning a place she'd carved out through sheer determination and refusing to accept that broken things couldn't be fixed. The past is past, Sebren said, addressing the room, but looking at both women beside him. Tonight, we begin again. If you cannot accept that, there's the door. If you can, then let's have a ball. The orchestra, taking their cue, launched into a waltz. For a moment, nobody moved, the shock too profound, the social recalculation too complex. Then Lady Margaret stepped forward, curtsied to Isabel. Your Grace, would you honor me with a dance? I've missed you terribly. Isabel's eyes filled with tears. I would like that very much. They took the floor together, two women dancing while society decided whether to condemn or accept. And then, slowly, other couples joined them. Not everyone. Alara could see people leaving in scandalized huffs, hear the whispered promises to never darken Ashenmore's doors again. But enough people stayed. Enough people chose compassion or curiosity or simply the thrill of witnessing history. Within minutes, the floor was full of dancers, and the ball had become something more than scandal. It had become a statement. Sebren turned to Alara. Dance with me? I should warn you, I'm terrible at waltzing. I don't care. He pulled her into the dance before she could protest further, and suddenly they were moving through the crowd, part of the swirl and spectacle. You did it, Alara said. You actually did it. We did it. This was your plan, your courage, your refusal to accept defeat. Sebren's grip tightened. I was drowning before you arrived. Now I can breathe. That's entirely your doing. Shared credit, then. You provided the resources and the title. I just provided the audacity. You provided so much more than audacity. Sebren's voice dropped, intimate despite the surrounding crowd. You provided hope, purpose, a reason to believe that impossible things might actually be possible. He paused. And you provided yourself, which is the most valuable gift of all. Alara's breath caught. This was dangerous territory, feelings they'd been circling for months, neither quite brave enough to name them directly. But the night was full of risks already. What was one more? Sebren? Wait! He spun her through a turn, then guided them toward the edge of the floor, away from the crush. Let me say this properly, before I lose my nerve. They stopped near the windows overlooking the gardens. Outside, twilight was painting everything in shades of gold and shadow. Inside, the ball continued without them, society dancing while two people stood at the edge of everything. When you arrived here, Sebren began, I was so tired I'd forgotten what it felt like to be anything else. Tired of impossible choices. Tired of duty without hope. Tired of being called a monster for doing what I thought was right. His hands framed her face with surprising gentleness. And then you climbed into my life like you climbed down that trellis, recklessly, bravely, refusing to accept that rules were immutable. You made me remember that exhaustion isn't the same as defeat. I didn't do anything special. You did everything special. You saw problems everyone else called unsolvable and demanded solutions anyway. You looked at my broken, impossible situation and said, let's fix it, instead of, I'm leaving. You took a woman everyone had given up on and gave her back her dignity. His thumb traced her cheekbone. You saved my wife, my sister, my estate, and somewhere in all that saving, you saved me too. Alara's eyes burned with tears she refused to shed. Not here, not now, not when she needed to be strong. You're giving me too much credit. I'm giving you exactly the credit you deserve, and I'm asking, he stopped, swallowed hard. I'm asking if you would consider making this permanent, not employment, not charity, partnership, marriage, whatever name you want to give it, as long as it means you stay. The room tilted. Alara had imagined many things over the past months, friendship, respect, perhaps something deeper developing slowly over years. But this? An actual proposal? From a duke who was technically still married, even if that marriage had transformed into something more like collaborative survival? What about Isabel? Alara asked. What about her? Sebren's hands dropped to capture hers. She's my wife-in-law and history, but in every way that matters, we ended years ago. She knows that, accepts it. We discussed this possibility weeks ago, and she encouraged it, said you deserve happiness after everything you've done for us. Society won't accept it. Society can go hang. I spent 7 years caring what they thought, and it got me nothing but loneliness. I'm done with that. I'd rather be scandalous and happy than proper and dead inside. His grip tightened. I love you, Alara Whitford. I love your courage, your stubbornness, your refusal to let injustice stand. I love how you argue with me, how you reorganize my life without asking permission, how you make impossible things feel achievable. And I'm asking you to marry me, knowing full well it will be complicated and scandalous and nothing like a normal marriage. But it will be real. And it will be ours. Alara looked at him, really looked at him. This man who'd started as a cold, frightening stranger and become something infinitely more complicated. Who'd offered her sanctuary when she had nowhere else to go. Who'd trusted her with his darkest secret and let her transform it from tragedy into hope. Who'd learned to feel again because she'd refused to let him stay frozen. Yes, she said, but on one condition. Name it. No more secrets. No more forbidden towers. If we're doing this, partnership, marriage, whatever we call it, we do it honestly, completely. No walls between us. Agreed. Sebrin pulled her closer. Anything else? Well, I'll need to write a very interesting letter to my mother. This is going to give her palpitations. He laughed, genuine, full, the sound of a man remembering joy. Your mother can join the rest of society in being scandalized. I'll make it worth the gossip. Promise? Absolutely. He kissed her then, right there at the edge of the ballroom, with half of society watching. It was thoroughly inappropriate, completely scandalous, and exactly perfect. When they finally broke apart, the ballroom had erupted into fresh whispers. But Alara didn't care. Let them talk. Let them judge. She'd spent a lifetime being invisible and powerless. Now she was neither, and she'd earned that visibility through courage and determination and refusing to accept that some problems were unsolvable. We should probably address the room, Sebrin murmured, before the gossip gets completely out of control. Too late for that. Might as well make it official. Alara took his hand, turned to face the assembled guests. Ladies and gentlemen, for those keeping track at home, yes, that was a proposal. Yes, I accepted. And yes, we're aware this is complicated. Any questions? The room burst into chaos, excited murmurs from allies, scandalized gasps from conservatives, frantic whispers from gossips already planning how to spread this news. Lady Pemberton looked like she might faint. Lord Blackwood had disappeared entirely, presumably unable to stomach watching the woman who'd destroyed him find happiness. But Cecilia broke free from the crowd, running toward Alara, with tears streaming down her face. You're getting married? Really married? To a duke? Really married, Alara confirmed, catching her sister in a fierce hug. To a difficult, complicated duke with a complicated situation. It's going to be a scandal. You've been a scandal for months. Might as well make it a permanent condition. Cecilia pulled back, laughing through tears. I'm so happy for you. You deserve this. All of this. After everything you did for me, I didn't do it for rewards. I did it because it was right. But Alara smiled. Though, I'll admit, this is a very nice outcome. Her mother appeared next, looking torn between pride and horror. Alara, this is unexpected. That seems to be my specialty. Alara braced for criticism. Instead, Constance surprised her by pulling her into an awkward embrace. You've done well, better than I ever imagined. I thought you were throwing your life away when you broke into that room, but apparently you were building a new one. She pulled back, eyes shining. I'm proud of you, even if I have no idea how to explain this to our relatives. Tell them I married for love in the middle of a scandal. It's on brand for me at this point. Thomas joined them, grinning. My sister, the Duchess. This is going to be insufferable. You mean amazing, Cecilia corrected. That too. Thomas hugged Alara quickly. Congratulations, you've earned this about 100 times over. The family reunion was interrupted by Isabel, who approached with Dr. Crawford still hovering protectively. Up close, Alara could see the strain in her eyes. This evening had cost her, emotionally and mentally, but she was still standing, still present. So, it's official, Isabel said. You're stealing my husband. I'm not, Alara started, but Isabel laughed. I'm joking, mostly. Sebrin and I haven't been a real marriage in years. We're family, but not lovers, not partners, not anything that would be threatened by this. She took Alara's hands. You gave me my life back. The least I can do is give you yours. Be happy, both of you. You've earned it. Thank you, Alara said, meaning it, for understanding, for being generous when you didn't have to be. Oh, please, you saved me from rotting in that tower. This is the least I can do. Isabel squeezed her hands once, then retreated back to Dr. Crawford's watchful presence. The ball continued around them, dancing, gossip, celebration, and scandal all mixed together. Alara stood at the center of it, with Sebrin beside her, her family nearby, and the wreckage of her old life transformed into something new and strange and absolutely right. This is insane, she said. Completely, Sebrin agreed. But you seem to thrive on insanity. I thrive on impossible things becoming possible. Alara looked around the ballroom at the guests who'd chosen to stay despite the scandal, at Isabel talking with Margaret, at her family safe and happy. 6 months ago, I was invisible, powerless, watching my sister walk toward destruction and my family toward ruin, and I had no idea how to stop any of it. And now? Now I'm a scandal, a duchess-to-be, and possibly the most talked about woman in England. I've helped heal a mentally ill woman, reorganized a duke's entire life, and proven that sometimes breaking every rule is exactly the right thing to do. She turned to face him. I'm not invisible anymore. I'll never be invisible again. Good. Sebren pulled her close, right there in front of everyone. The world needs to see you, needs to know that ordinary women can do extraordinary things when they refuse to accept limitations. I was never ordinary. I was just unseen. Alara smiled. There's a difference. The music swelled. The dance continued. And somewhere in London, scandal sheets were already being prepared with headlines that would make Alara Whitford, soon to be Alara Vale, the most infamous woman of the season. Let them write their stories. Let society gasp and gossip and judge. She'd climbed down a trellis, stolen evidence from a lord, confronted a predator publicly, and transformed a duke's impossible situation into something manageable. She'd done the impossible. Everything after that was just noise. The wedding took place 3 months later in the wild gardens of Ashenmore, with only family and close friends in attendance. Isabel was there, stable and genuinely happy for them. Margaret served as witness. Even Alara's mother managed to smile without wincing at the unconventional arrangements. The ceremony was simple, honest, thoroughly scandalous, and absolutely perfect. Afterward, as twilight painted the sky in shades of gold and violet, Alara stood with Sebren on the terrace where she'd once climbed down a trellis in desperate pursuit of justice. The view stretched out before them, wild, harsh, beautiful landscape that had become home. Any regrets? Sebren asked. Not even one. Alara leaned against him, solid and warm and real. Though I do wonder what would have happened if I'd never overheard that conversation in the library, if I'd never climbed down that trellis, if I'd just stayed invisible and let everything happen. Your sister would have been ruined, your family destroyed, and I'd still be drowning in isolation, convinced there was no solution to Isabel's situation. Sebren's arm tightened around her. But you did overhear. You did climb. You did fight. And everything changed. Everything changed, Alara agreed. I changed. From invisible daughter to duchess. From powerless to powerful. From someone who accepted limitations to someone who destroys them. You were always powerful. You just didn't know it yet. Maybe. Or maybe power is something you build piece by piece by refusing to accept that impossible means impossible. She turned in his arms. I spent 24 years being told who I was and what I could do. Then I decided to write my own story instead. And look what happened. You became extraordinary. I became visible. That's better than extraordinary. Alara smiled up at him. And I'm going to make sure other women know they can do the same. That they don't have to accept the limitations society imposes. That sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is break the rules everyone says are unbreakable. My radical wife. But Sebren said it with pride. What are you planning? Everything. Letters to those other girls from Blackwood's Wagers. Let them know they're not alone. Support for Dr. Crawford's research on humane mental health treatment. Maybe funding for women who need to escape impossible situations. Alara's mind was already racing with possibilities. You have resources, influence, and a wife who stopped caring what society thinks. We can do so much good with that combination. We can, Sebren agreed. We will, together. Together. The word carried weight and promise, and the future they'd build from the wreckage of impossible situations. Behind them, through the open windows, music and laughter drifted from the celebration. Their family, their friends, their life. Complicated, scandalous, absolutely imperfect, and absolutely theirs. Alara had climbed down a trellis 6 months ago, terrified and desperate, with no idea where that single act of courage would lead. She'd thought she was saving her sister. She'd ended up saving herself. And in doing so, she'd proven something important, that invisible women could become powerful, that impossible situations could be solved, That sometimes the bravest thing you could do was refuse to stay silent when everyone expected you to disappear. She wasn't invisible anymore. She would never be invisible again. And that made all the difference.